know what the weak point of a mech is? The fucking pilot.
Get away from her, you bitch!
His papers say he was a raven.
Protocol 3.
A pattern blue!
Welcome to On the Shoulders of Giants, a giant robot power hour discussing mechs across media, their stories, and why we love them. I am Brian, and I'm joined by Alice.
Sweet Ken Mother, I cannot podcast, for slender god Aphrodite has overcome me with longing for a girl. Her hand I clasp, queen arm locked with queen, and descend into the foretold hall of Aquarium to share in Yuri bliss.
And Nico.
I was hyped for the new epic, but the Scald straight up called my armor Ugsome, and before the winches too. Alas.
Today, Prithee, take rooted stock upon thine bums and listen to me fair. Podcast host with middling audio and good, fun homosexual air. For we speak of stalwart mechs and rude lesbians in space today. Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright and her many, many frays. Let's launch into it.
Having fun isn't hard when you've got a library card. Having fun isn't hard when you've got a library card.
This is a free and like 100% free, incredibly sprawling epic poem that you can read off of Itch by Thaliarchus. I suspect that many of the listeners know who this is just because I think that they are I am beginning to perceive a shape on the internet, and that shape is the small but very interlocked queer mecha community.
What?
Because Thaliarchus has people, so he does VODs where he reads these. You should check those out, by the way. They're all really good.
Oh, they're all fantastic. I've listened to them.
Yeah, so those are on twitch.tv/Thaliarchus. And I recognize names that are in those streams from people who followed us on co-host who don't cross-section with Giant Robot FM, but Thaliarchus cross-sections with Giant Robot FM. So it's like coming together.
Brian is perceiving. Listen, there are gay mecha spheres for those with eyes to see.
Yeah.
Forget your cathedrals, okay? Come join us in the gay mechs.
When yonder window breaks, but queer mecha fans.
Breaking in your window to go, hey, have you read this big-ass poem?
Now, when you think of a poem, and even a long poem, you think of that asshole Shakespeare and his shitty soliloquies. How many pages is this poem, this epic of Gilgamesh?
Yes, it is about 185 pages. I would say if you're not used to reading poetry, it's probably a 6 to 8-ish hour read altogether. Mm-hmm. And to kind of, we'll speak about the actual thing of reading poetry in a little bit. But just to give some background info, actually, we'll also talk about this because I got to sit down with Thaliarchus, and I'll just staple that onto the end of this episode. But currently, the first half of the story has been published in text, and that's what you can download for free on Itch. This is very clearly just the Aeneid. And so what's happening is the Aeneid is split into two parts. The first part ends with their journey to the underworld, which is also how the currently published version of Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright ends. So it's like he's split it into two halves. The other half is what he's doing with the VODs. Those will be readable at some point, but right now the only way to consume those is to watch the Twitch VODs. So it is actually longer than that. We just haven't gotten that part of it yet. And I think he said he plans on just releasing it all when he's done doing the VODs, maybe by the end of the year.
Yeah, he says something about that on his streams. I do think it's funny, he's intent on, reading them into the record before they are published in form. And I will say, as someone who watched them, it is funny because sometimes marginalia notes will still be in the PDF, and people will ask questions and clarify some things during the stream. And I do think that is part of the revision process, honestly, for the end of this. I think, and I mean, Alice, I think you can agree on this, actually speaking poetry out loud is definitely an important component of understanding how it is going to be read and heard.
Yes.
So I think
Right.
it's interesting that
And
that's an
especially
important part of this.
The framework of, I mean, what this is a storied epic to be told around campfires and long halls. And so to match that, and also in modern poetry circles, presenting poetry to others for their feedback is a critical part of actually forming poetry that can be consumed by others. Because anybody can write a poem for themselves and those close to them, but it's how
You
the
could do
world
it right
interacts
now.
with that. Legally, no one can stop you from writing a 186-page love story about women in space, okay?
Yes.
No one can stop you. But how people interact with that is important. And I do love seeing the active part of it in the Twitch VODs of, you know, hey, chat, you're actually doing good for once.
Another thing to mention too that also that came up during our interview was just that after the full scope thing has been published, Thaliarchus also wants to release what he's going to call Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright New Game Plus, where he just publishes the original PDFs that still have all of the citations and extra notes and marginalia in them. So that should be pretty fun too.
Yeah, they were talking on one stream about, jokingly about, don't not know if it's feasible or even worth anyone's time to create a genetic version of this, which is like tracing all of the lineages of the different drafts. So I think it's funny they're kind of getting out, or he's kind of getting out in front of it to be like, yep, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and publish this with all the notes.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I think that rules, and I think the name of it rules too. But did you guys know anything about this before I put it on the schedule, or?
I didn't know anything. I think what this podcast is really shining a light on for me is that I thought I had consumed a majority of mecha content. It was just anime. That's it. There is so much out there I have not interacted with outside of video games and anime and manga, and I didn't know about this. And I feel like that's wild because this is right up my alley.
For me, like, I hadn't heard of this at all. I didn't know this existed as a project. And like Alice said, like, if there's one thing our show does, I love that it's exposing me to different projects that people are doing, especially like different kind of almost like niche or weird projects, because it just brings me so much delight to have people just going sicko mode in whatever their field or passion is. But also there's mechs there. Like, it makes me so happy. Alice will know I have a somewhat fraught relationship with poetry. So when Brian said, "Hey, I'm bringing a big poem," for a period of time I was known as the poetry hater. So when Brian said he was bringing a huge fucking poem, I was like, okay, you know what? I will do anything for my friends. Alice has read books. Like, I could do that. We've all watched The Price of Smiles. Like, I can do this. We all played Jivo. We've all suffered. I can do this. But I was extremely pleasantly surprised, not the least of which because another point of contention with me and Alice, I'm a Shakespeare freak. I don't think this has come up before, but I love
Nope, not
Mr.
in our
Willie.
relationship. Ooh, we're gonna have to fight in the parking lot after this.
So I went in terrified for the free verse mech, and I came out fortified by the metrical mechs.
The Mechtricals.
The metrical mechs.
Well, that's
What
good to
about
hear.
you, Bri? How did you hear about this?
Yeah.
I don't super know. I am pretty sure. So this is something that I hope happens in terms of us getting new listeners too, which is just to say, like, I am pretty sure I was following mecha people on Twitter and co-hosts and stuff, and I happened to see the cover of Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright, which is drawn by another fairly prolific mecha online figure, Skin. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's SZKIN. Skin? I don't know. So they drew the cover. It's a really fucking cool cover. If anything else, just check out that image because it's just the picture of Kin-Bright's mech. And I was like, that looks fucking cool. And then I like looked at it, and at that time, I think he had only published like the first 6 books or something. Like this was like way in like December of last year or something like that. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna like keep an eyeball on this and sit on it. And like when it reaches either completion or like a point where it seems like something we can digest and talk about, I'll put it on the schedule. And so I did that, and it happened to kind of sync up perfectly with this moment where He is on like the publishing hiatus, still telling the story, but we have a good chunk to talk about. And also, we kind of know where this is going because, again, it's just the Aeneid. And also, like a lot of epic poems, we kind of got the scope of what we're going to be dealing with in the first couple paragraphs. There's all that. But yeah, it was literally just like, I hope that someone sees one of our cool images and also checks us out the exact way that I did that with Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright, because I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
No, I love that. I love that. That's really great.
So if we don't have anything else, I'll give a short little synopsis.
Yeah, what happened in 185 pages of verse?
Gay shit.
There's 182
Okay.
written pages.
Okay.
I have my physically printed copy here. With
Listeners cannot see it. Alice has just pulled out a binder. Brian has just pulled out like a binder clipped copy.
Yeah.
I was an audio consumer, I will say that. I was like, how am I going to fit this big old poem into my life? Thankfully, Thaliarchus does have all of the VODs on their Twitch channel, and he reads them very well, and like, that was just good reading. It was just good ass reading.
By his own admission, it dearly helps to be British reading these poems, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah. So basically what's happening here, like we've mentioned so many times already, it's the Aeneid. So the warrior race Taru once held their planet Tar with utopic dominion until their rivals literally felled them with the oldest trick in the book. Literally, it's literally the horse.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
I was sitting there, I was like, this isn't literally the horse, is it? Yeah, it's literally
the horse. Only Kin-Bright, ferocious lesbian mech pilot who happened to find the armor that controls a massive god weapon, was able to save them. Routed from Tar, the Taru head toward their ancestral home system, and on the way are attacked by pirates and joined by space nomad Skelons, led by Queen Quertheart, who wants to hold hands with Kin-Bright. Arriving at their home system, the Taru are confronted with a post-schism ancestor race split into two fairly equally unwelcoming parties in the Refcom forces, which reside on the planet Reform, and the Regalt, I think that's how you pronounce that, court, who inhabit the desert planet Rock. Refcom begrudgingly gives the Taru a small continent, and shit immediately goes to hell. There's a genocidal pirate fleet, and desert inhabitants getting kidnapped, and all kinds of other Shakespearean and Taminoan shit happening. There's a space station underworld. But hey, what's really important is at the end of the day, Quertheart gets the go-ahead to nosedive Kin-Bright's bosom from KB's deceased wife herself from beyond the grave. And as far as we know, everything will always be fine for both of them. The end.
Yeah. No, I believe that. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, everything in here has been great for them so far. Absolutely no tragedy has befallen them in this entire
only.
first half.
W's only. Roll sixes and never die.
W for W only.
So yeah, we'll take a break and then we're gonna talk about a big old poem like a bunch of queers.
Hell yes. Hey, Nico here in the break. Just wanted to let you know that while this is a podcast, and we'll always do our best to describe visuals we're commenting on, we'll also include links to the mechs and images we discuss in the show notes, and post actual photos on our show website. Along with that, make sure to check the show notes for content warnings as appropriate to the episode. That's all for now. Back to the show.
So I have this divided into basically like essentially 3 parts, with books 1 through 3, which deals with like the intro and then the flashback that talks about what happened to Tar, and then books 4 through 7, which is like their kind of misadventures in basically being Palestine. And then books 8 through 10 is like full Greek fucking play poem going to the underworld, but it's also a space station, which is the coolest fucking thing I've ever read in my life. Anyway, yeah. Dyson's Fear of the Dead, exactly. I just saw Alice's note on this. That's exactly what I thought too.
The Dead.
Yeah.
So great.
As I like to call it.
I will say first off, so like I said, when I opened the PDF,
Cracked it.
I was like expecting free verse, something, because it's been so long since I thought about things written in meter and like epic poems as poetry. Like, through my degree and through some of the work I did while I was in college, I was exposed to a lot of modern poetry and experimental poetry, and I realized that it kind of like warped my idea of what to expect. And so when I opened it and it was like, okay, we've got some archaic words, we've got some archaic grammar, we've got meter, We've got different structure to the sentences. I realized that what I was dealing more with was that kind of like classical poem and classical epic, but also like Alice, you brought up like Shakespeare, because all of that was written in iambic pentameter. Like I was back home, because actually before I got into all the modern poetry and the experimental poetry, I was, like I said, a big Shakespeare head. And I can't recommend enough reading this, but also listening to some of this read out, because you will better understand why it's written the way it is, because the rhythm of speech in this is just fantastic. And I just want to say that up front. I love that.
That's one of the things that Thaliarchus and I talked about too, is the way that a lot of people are going to be coming to this from an angle of having understood a lot of modern poetry. I had the exact same experience where it was like all of my college career, my glances with poetry were all like deeply personal, like free verse, experimental poetry, things like that. And another thing that we talk about too is like, those are not bad. Some of the best writing I've ever read is that stuff, but this is just not that. Thaliarchus is a PhD in like medieval and early English literature. So like it shows like this is extremely competently done in terms of like what the actual rules of the poem are. I believe it's called blank verse.
Yeah, this is way more Chaucer than Ginsberg. Like,
yeah. And also too, to just talk about like, if you're not familiar with epic poetry at all, like if you've never read like the Ramayana or like Epic of Gilgamesh or anything, a good place to start is just to know that poetry is not nearly as exact. Like we are not being just straight up told exactly what's happening all the time. There are plenty of things that are up to interpretation. A lot of discussing poetry is like, is this what happened or is this what happened? And that's why people still talk about Shakespeare so much, right? So it can seem like intimidating or difficult to squeeze out what's happening, but like it takes some getting used to. But yeah, that's kind of the beauty of it.
Yeah, I will say there's a lot of passive voice in this, which I think people have been disabused from using by a lot of like common writing wisdom. But this was kind of the style of the time, and it also, again, like, I feel like poetry in this vein is as much about the rhythm of speech as it is about the content of what's being said. And so sometimes things are moved around for the sake of the rhythm and the meter. And the meter, what do we mean when we say meter, Alice? Do you want to teach?
It's about 3.3 feet.
All right,
that was beautiful. That was so beautiful.
Means the sentences are short.
Meter refers to how many syllables are in a sentence and what parts are stressed and unstressed, and it creates a rhythm when you read the line and when you hear it spoken aloud. And so specific meter is more desirous for specific types of tone, and this is shooting for a very specific type, and so sometimes the content and the words get shifted around, I think, in favor of creating that kind of really beautiful rhythm.
And also of note, most of the poetry in here is not rhyming poetry. It's rhyming in more of a like, there are words that rhyme and there are thoughts that rhyme, but it ain't going for the every other sentence rhymes until
we're not doing couplets
till like book 10. But I also do think it's really cool that the style of poetry changes throughout it. Like some of the books have wildly different styles of poetry, but they all still fit within the telling of this epic.
Yeah, and I also, just to shout out, to be clear, if you want a little bit more on this before we dive into talking about like the specific circumstances, a lot of the things that Thaliarchus and I talked about are specifically what these choices were, what they mean in terms of the rules of poetry, and why he did them that way. So if you want any more on the specifics of that, just skip towards the end of the episode. I'll probably put a timestamp in for like when I end up dropping that in.
We'll wait.
Approximately 2 hours, 5 minutes, and 26 seconds.
Or listen to us talk ineptly about it and then listen to the expert.
Yeah, that works too.
The literal expert, the on paper expert.
Yeah.
I do think I started to tell my story of how I became the poetry joker, and I think it's useful in talking about this because I think it's an experience maybe more people than me have had with poetry that kind of discouraged you from getting into it.
Tell us how you got those scars, Nico.
How did I get these scars? Really big spoon.
Really big spoon. Fuck you.
No. So as I was saying to Alice, in high school, I thought poetry was kind of cringy. You know, I thought it was what you wrote when your soul was full of darkness and you were emo, because that was the time period in which I went to high school. But I got to college and I decided to do a creative writing degree at an ag college, which is an experience I don't know that I can recommend. But as part of my creative writing degree, of course, I had to take some poetry. And I had this professor and I went in. I was at college. I was also homeless at this time, so I was like, I was in my feelings. And I was trying.
You were downplaying homelessness by saying, "Yeah, I was kind of in my feelings about places."
I was kind of in my feelings about not being home, or about not having a home. Don't worry about it. It gets better. But so I was supposed to write this poem of place. And I was like, okay, the only place I've been regularly that has had interesting things happen to me other than the bookshop, which every other little poet nerd was writing about the bookshop for this assignment. I was like, the bus. I am on the bus frequently. I take public transit everywhere. It's a really interesting place, even though it moves. It's transportation. So I was like, okay, I'm going to write about the bus. And I do really bad with freeform stuff. A lot of people were writing blank verse. They were writing really experimental stuff. They were writing just kind of get out your notebook, put line breaks where you want them. Do you want it to rhyme? You can if you want to, that kind of stuff. I decided to write a villanelle, which is a very specific form of poetry with repeating lines. But for me, it was like guide rails, right? Because I had been a prose bitch my whole life, and I just really didn't know what to do with poetry. So I wrote a villanelle about being on the bus. And I was actually pretty proud of it. It was the first time I had ever applied myself. I know!
This truly is your Villanelle arc.
But I wrote this thing and I was so proud of it. And I really felt that, like, for the first time I was giving poetry its due. Like, I was actually
giving poetry.
I was giving
It was
poetry.
really giving poetry.
But I was so proud of it and I turned it in, and you might be able to guess the ending here. I was failed on that assignment. I was told that I had not followed the assignment and
What
failed.
part?
In a poetry class. She never clarified that for me. I was supposed to meet her during office hours, and she just kept not being at her office hours. Derogatorily poet behavior. But, like, for me, and I think that's an experience probably more than a few people have had, where it's like they think they're finally kind of trying to understand poetry and give it a chance. And then maybe you run into a prescriptivist or someone who has a very specific idea of what it should mean. And then it kind of ruins poetry for you. That, or you have a bad breakup and your partner was really into poetry.
I do think that's a huge thing in academia. I think that a lot of people's, like, potential creative outlets are dashed by people with closed minds. And, like, I say this jokingly a lot, but I am pretty much 100% serious that we should be viewing humanities degrees as license to break rules instead of be fucking dogmatic about them.
Let me do it. Oh, sorry. Can I do my thought on poetry?
Yes,
please.
Because you honestly, Alice, you are one of the people that brought me back around on it and allowed me to admit that there were poems I liked. And now I'm in a place where I'm like, actually, I like some poetry.
Is poetry sick?
So, poetry's sick sometimes. Here's my thoughts on poetry. So I had exes into poetry. And I also struggled with poetry going up, mostly in a classroom environment. I hate William Shakespeare. I hate his writings. I think they do not need to be put on the pedestal they're on, and they've been done a million times better. So we can move on. We're good. We got it.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or by taking arms against a sea of trouble. Oh, fuck, I forgot it. Never mind. Alice is right. Shakespeare's busted.
A better version of that exists in a movie from 2000 where they use guns as the swords, and they use the lyrics exactly the same. Anyway.
Romeo plus Juliet is the final form of Shakespeare, it must be said.
We're done. Move on.
Yeah.
But I struggled with this growing up. And then what's the opposite of a Joker moment? My awakening?
Your de-radicalization.
Right? My radicalization. So it wasn't. I didn't write a poem about a bus while I was homeless. I read some popcorn poetry. It was poetry that did not come from a place of hurt, of pain, of a person's journey. It wasn't spoken in a basement lounge. Like, I'd gone to those. They were fun, but it was just fun poetry that I could enjoy, and it didn't have too much deeper meaning to it. It was kind of gay. And I came to this conclusion, and the conclusion I come to it is the same I come to with modern art, which is it exists. It's still being produced. You can consume many different kinds of it, but no one can really truly, like, I mean, a person with a PhD can tell me what the definition of poetry is. But in the same way that somebody can tell me what modern art is, anything can be modern art. Anything can be poetry. And so for me, poetry, and I think a lot when people, I mean, like, even with our listeners, right? There are going to be some who are like, well, I'm not going to engage with poetry. It's heavy. It's thick. I need to have a degree. I don't have a fucking degree in writing. Mine's in fucking computer science, and I can still enjoy poetry because you can just enjoy poetry. You don't have to, like, I have notes in my margin. I have highlights fucking on every page about passages that mean, because that's how I engage with poetry. But you don't have to do that. You can just read this and say, wow, cool robot. Wow, cool lesbians. Like,
you can put the VOD on while you are scrambling to replay a game, which is probably not worth your time, in anticipation of the sequel being released, and be like, wow, this is so much better than the audio I would have been listening to if I was listening to my game audio. Listen, if you're doing Destiny grind missions, put on the VODs of Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright, and it will improve your experience. Because
I genuinely think that may be a genius thing to do.
different part of your brain. But yeah, listening to it while doing something else for you fucking Gen Z people with your subway runners, get some fucking education about lesbians in space. Let's go!
All right, should we go over like there's really only like 3 central characters that you need to know in every situation. Should we just go over those really quickly?
Can we please?
We can. Real quick though, Brian, what was your relationship like with poetry? Because me and Alice just like gave our theses.
This is our first time covering poetry, so listeners might not know where we're all coming from, you know?
Okay, I have some dark lore then.
Yes! We are all sharing our pain.
We're going to the Dice and Death Planet so I can deliver the soliloquy about how sad I am. Throughout like elementary and middle school, I fancied myself a fucking laureate. I thought I was like the bee's fucking knees because what happened was, you have to understand something about the education system around the time the gifted program started happening, which is that our entire generation was raised with this weird delusion of grandeur and then was made fun of for having delusions of grandeur. So I was given an award for a middling little child's poem I wrote in like 6th grade. I was in the newspaper. I was interviewed. And so from that point forward, I was like, poetry is what I was meant to do.
The child prodigy. We found them.
I never knew Brian in high school, but I was bullying Brian in high school.
Yeah, exactly. And so I continued to write little, and you know, these were all very angsty little, like, experimental gay angst poems about how I was a sad teenager. None of them are good. All of them are, well, there's maybe one that I would say, oh, okay, I could put that in a portfolio and it wouldn't be terrible. That is basically, I was resistant to learning about older forms or different forms or other forms of poetry throughout my education because I thought I was, like, so good already that I was like, I don't need to know that. That's not the kind of poet I am. So I'm not going to engage with this type of poetry. This is a very bad mindset to have in all of academic contexts. Do not fall into this trap.
In any field.
In any field,
frankly.
Yeah.
If you are an architect and you think you have nothing to learn from anyone else, you're going to kill us.
Yes.
Frank Lloyd Wright, you're on fucking notice.
Oh, you are on fucking notice. He's exactly who I was thinking of.
Yeah.
I'm the best thing that's ever happened to architecture. Oh my fucking God, you made a room with windows. Great job, asshole. I'm coming for Shakespeare. I'm coming for...
So then I started writing prose and I realized, oh, holy shit, hold on, wait, I'm way better at this than I ever was at poetry. So poetry just kind of fell off my palette completely. I have
do
not
you feel like poetry was limiting to you? I've read your prose, and do you feel like your poetry limited what you could put on a page?
I super do, because the thing about me is that as soon as there's a rule, I find it a rule or a box I have to fit into, I find it crippling, and that is also probably not a super good thing. And poetry
is why you called me a sicko for writing a villanelle.
Yes.
You are.
And I find guide rails helpful. I find rules helpful. But I don't think poetry allows my creative apparatus is I truly do think is better fit to the experimentations I can do with prose versus poetry. But I don't feel stifled by it. It's just not something I enjoy doing anymore. This is probably the only poem I've read meaningfully and engages meaningfully and took notes on and like had thoughts about that went places in like since college, like probably 10-ish years. So
Let's get into it. Let's launch into it. Tell us about who are our main actors, if you could,
Dramatis
Ryan.
personae.
the most important characters that I have are Kin-Bright, which is the main character. My note on her is she is a gay minor lord. She is a princess warrior. She pilots the key that controls the big god mech.
She's a widow.
She's a widow. She is very bristly and passionate.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a passage later when they're on the ancestral planets, and she makes her first appearance to the public there, and they describe her as like exotic, and they specifically they attribute a lot of like almost warlike attributes and primitive attributes to her as a person outside of their culture. I thought that was really interesting, and it comes into play later.
Then we have Kin-Hard, which is Kin-Bright's brother. He pilots my favorite mech, which is called 1,000 Thornbills. It is just a Gundam Heavy Arms. So I just love it. And he's just kind of like a stoic, like, is he an older brother? Do we know? He feels like an older brother to me.
I will admit to getting a little lost in the Kin family tree.
He is not. He is a younger brother because she has heir to the clan.
Oh, true. That's
okay.
correct. Yes.
Firstborn princess.
Then we have Queerheart, who is my favorite. She is a gay queen, so gay that
We're
it
like
is
queer
actually
heart, am I right, boys?
totally. You're totally right. It's Queerheart. She's so gay for Kin-Bright, it's actually oozing off the page. It's like
There is a fucking moment after Kin-Bright relates the fall of Tar where they're like, yeah, Kin-Bright got all caught up doing the recollection and didn't realize that Queerheart was like kneeling at her feet and clasping her hands. And I was like, oh, down atrocious from moment one.
And then the only other character I actually have written down. So we have Kin-Might, who is Kin-Bright's mom, who I wrote down. Unfortunately, she does not make it through this reading. She's kind of a fierce leader, current head of
Do you have
House
down the
Kin.
leader of the Skulls?
I don't.
I would call
I
them
have
a
it.
major character.
I have it.
Yeah, because they're the pursuers, right?
Yes, and I have it somewhere. It's not in my list of characters, though, unfortunately.
Earl. My name is Earl. I would call
The
them
Earl
a
of
major
Hawks?
character. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a grizzled veteran, cranky old man.
I think another major character, but only really in terms of framing Kin-Bright, which I think is interesting, is Kin-Bright's father. I forget, he's Kin something, obviously, but
Yeah.
he comes to Kin-Bright in a dream to warn her of the sack of Tar, basically. And I was getting so many like Hamlet and the ghost of his father energies from that. And it's like, it's one of those like ancient tropes, like the spirit of a loved one lost has come to you. But I like the significance it also gives Kin-Bright throughout the story. Cause like, not only is she like heir, but also like she's been visited by the spirit of her dead father, you know, like I love that element of it.
What's our rule on quoting the text, by the way?
It's a free thing by one person. I think he's totally fine with you quoting text.
And there is a free version of the audio, so it's not like you're impinging on a potential paid version of the audio.
Right.
So you're totally
Perfect.
fine.
Thank you, because I did want to read quotes.
Yeah.
I have a character written down just because I really like his name. His name is Mushat. He kind of sucks, but I just think he has a really cool name.
He's the one that Kin-Bright keeps texting during the...
She's like, you're literally just standing there. And he's like, sorry, man, my boss said no. And yeah, she finally gets him to move his ass. But like, I was like, dude. Anyway,
so good.
I just love his name. So yeah, we begin with just a cool space battle, like all super robot shit should, in my opinion.
You guys like Battlestar Galactica 2004?
I like Battlestar Galactica. I like Space Runaway Ideon. I like Gundam.
I like Mass Effect when we get the migrant fleet basically that shows up.
Oh, I was literally just gonna ask what your first impressions were, like actually diving into the text of the material.
I love this for a first scene because it immediately shows you kind of exactly what you're in for as far as the energy and the pace and the diction, the word choice in this. There is something so compelling about having an archaic grammar style and meter applied to describing things like launching barrages and opening comms and checking your sensors. And like all of those words and concepts are in there mixed in with different ideas. Like there are several points at which a person will make a bloody sacrifice, like an animal sacrifice, and then you will be like, and then they head to the mech bay and they climb up in the webbing, in the mesh. And I love that contrast, and it's really strong in the battles because you're getting the mech action delivered to you in this format, which creates this like juxtaposition. Like it's putting two things together that maybe most people wouldn't think go together, and it creates this like really delightful energy where you're listening to it. And it's honestly what it reminds me of. The reason that I'm a Shakespeare sicko is because I had a teacher in 5th and 6th grade who made us perform Shakespeare, like not plays, but like scenes. And the young guys would always want to do the fight scenes from Romeo and Juliet because her son was a fight choreographer for their local acting company, and he would bring in the pool noodle swords and teach them how to wail on each other safely. And there is so much fun seeing a fight happening and then having people deliver lines that are kind of archaic, and that energy for me was here. And like, oh, this is a mech battle. I can visualize this mech battle.
Yeah.
There's lasers and shit, but also the way that this is being described is like just sweeping and beautiful. Is just really cool.
Yeah, Alice, what is your first impression?
And Kin-Bright smiled, for she was young and still at an age when victory death road's nearness clouds. This shit rips.
It does rip!
So, something that, how do you pronounce this person's name?
Thaliarchus.
Thali-chan. So Thali does this really cool thing where...
I'm so sorry.
It's the mix of archaic, historic terms, thanes, gar, shit like that, just thrown out. And the fact that, like, they talk about spear walls. They're in a space battle in the folds of space. And we pay no mind to the fact that we are in a rip in space and there are Newtonian physics and shit happening. And in the middle of this, they're opening up comms and declaring their intent to each other, which is just, they use spears, and the spears have like festoons on them, and they're still like, oh, there is like an honor to these fighting these brigands. That is just so cool because it's not. Okay, I'm going to put this not on the same pedestal, but I need it as a reference point. Mm-hmm. But there's an anime called Knights and Magic in which they have giant suits of armor and they act like, old knights of old.
Mm-hmm.
And it's bad. It's bad. One of the main reasons it's bad is it's a world in which, and I hate this, when the technology is so old we don't know how it works. And in Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright, there's an understanding of how this technology works. It's not like Warhammer 40k, the priests aren't, a lot of them are trying their best with figuring out what to do with these things, specifically the god that watches over. But there's this knowledge that they know what they're doing, and these are all practice things that still have history. Like, they have a spear, but the spear has breaching charges on the tip of it to blow open a ram ship. Also, there's a ram ship.
There's a ram ship. I do want to push back a little bit on the knowing how the technology works thing, because I think the key thing about the Taru Skelon fleet is that they actually don't super know how the god works. They don't super know how Kin-Bright's key works. But yeah,
But they know how to tear rips in space. Like,
yes.
They know some technologies.
And I do want to talk about the Fold because I think it's very cool. This is how hyperspace, basically, that they're having this fight in.
Mm-hmm.
And the Fold is described with a lot of oceanic words. It behaves a lot like a body of water, which I think is super cool when you think again about how this is the Aeneid and how much sailing and naval battles are part of the Aeneid.
Let's head in to wine dark space.
It's so cool. And yeah, so we get these like this battle, and like, to be clear, there are spears and stuff, but there are also proton cannons and lasers and lightning whips, and like it's everything.
There's void shields. It's everything.
And to Alice's point about them understanding the technology, there's a bit later when they go to fight the Steam Drake where they're picking out their weapons. We get like an armory scene.
Yeah, yes.
And they very consciously are picking out archaic-ish weapons, but that they also have modern features, but they're very specifically picking what is going to be good for the terrain that they're fighting in, and I love that aspect of it. I do love that kind of mastery of it. Like, it's really cool.
I totally agree. I mean, the thing about the Taro is that they are such competent fighters. And so like this is kind of what's painting that for us.
Yeah, one of the cool ways that this operates is typically at this level of advanced technology, everyone would be kind of bloodless and fighting for nations and fighting for, just like corporations or something like this. I think that this poem really bangs because it is applying like ancient world ideas of family and lineage and hospitality and knowing peoples from a certain place and knowing that you share ancestry with certain peoples to just like the craziest tech shit you've ever seen. It really just... It's giving Horizon Zero Dawn written by people who weren't just trying to make Native Americans. It's giving, like, we have advanced technology, but archaic ways of like, being societies, which is really cool.
So what do you guys know about, like, ancient warfare?
Oh, fucking nothing. Please educate us.
I watched the movie 300. I'm sorry, I watched the documentary film 300.
I watched the documentary film 300 and its companion piece, whatever that fucking horrible... scary movie joke version of it was.
Oh god, did we all see that? Oh
we
my
did
god,
all
I
see
saw
that
in theaters.
We did.
Anyway.
So something that Thali does really cool that I really enjoy is the fleet composition. So they have HAB ships, right? And they have destroyers, and they fan out the frigates. They do everything that you would do in a modern naval engagement. But at the same time, they're using, like, their enemy is using ram ship tactics, which is a wild thing in space to do. But the fact that they, like, fan out spearmen and everything, it's this weird mix of, like, yes, the Fold is a naval battle, but also these mechs exist in the space. And, I mean, like, you can't just send out soldiers in the ocean, but you can in the Fold. And I really love it. It's just I was horny for when the brigands attacked,
Yeah,
I love a good brigand attack.
Up, getting horny about the brigand attack.
And then of course accompanying them is the Space Runaway Ideon, the Super Dimension Fortress Macross, the Gunbuster. They have a humongous fucking mech that has lasers and beam sabers that they just use to decimate these brigands.
So, okay.
It's good.
We have to talk about the god.
Yeah.
Number one, God is never capitalized once in this.
I really do like that they have household gods, and then they have these kind of gods, which are these crazy technologies. It's really cool. So I like that there is still that kind of, like, casualized pantheism.
But something, so I love that. The other thought I wanted to get out about this section is, in our modern world, every inch of land is accounted for. So border conflicts are the way of combat. But in ancient times, you didn't know what was happening in the town over unless you sent a rider. And I love that the use of space in this accounts for that. Like, we never get long distance transmissions in this. We don't have that technology. So you can have a entire ass band of brigands exist. Like, that's not a thing we just have anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what makes the migrant fleet special, right? Is they can detect things within Fold space, which is really cool.
Also, is it chthonic? Chthonic?
Sonic.
Okay, thank you.
Like Sonic.
But yeah, with the help of the newly arrived Skelanders, led by Queen Courtheart, they thwart the pirates, And then they meet aboard one of the Hab ships. And this is where we get KB telling the Skelons how they got to this place.
There was
Allison,
a
do you
funny
have
moment.
We have to be very clear. Courtheart is both poised in war and peace. Just want to
Yes.
get that out there.
You know, we gotta know this.
We
It's
got to
important.
acknowledge it. He is poised in both war and peace.
My favorite thing, this is a mech base scene after they get back to the Hab ship,
Yes.
and like, Kin-Bright hops out the mech, and I think it was supposed to just be like cool water, but it did to me sound like they walked up with a cold brew and a towel. And she was like, hell yeah, brother, and like cracked a cold one, downed it, toweled off, and then was like, where's that cool bitch?
But if you know night culture, it probably was a brew. I mean, even on a Hab ship, it was customary to serve a night ale after they've been. I don't know.
I think
I
it's
can
really
see it.
cool if space PBR is offered and then you crack one and then you go see the cool lady you just met. I love this. This is a hell of a meet cute.
Should we discuss the different styles of suit on this Mecha podcast? I feel like we should pay that homage.
No, we need
Yes,
to ignore it and talk more about
the
meter.
Skelons have super cool suits that they're like if I recall correctly, they're kind of like Heaven Will Be Mine Saturn, like tubes hooked up to shit.
Yep, outboard artificial lungs and processors so they can self-sustain. Whereas the Taru have skin-tight suits and require their basically
because Queerheart makes fun of Kin-Bright because she's like, "Are you wearing a suit or are you just wearing body paint?"
It's so funny. But it's the two different styles because as a nomadic tribe, keeping their people alive is important to them, whereas the Taru are like, I will die in combat. I don't need to. If my suit gets breached, fuck it, I'm dead.
Well, and I think it's interesting here to point out the difference between the cultures. We find out more about the sack of tar later, but the Taru were a people who had a planet. And so you have to think that their technology was about infrequent battles in these kind of situations, whereas the Skelanders are like, this is their whole thing. They live out there all the time. I imagine like issues where the ships breach and everyone gets blown into space are way more common for them. And so their culture and their gear is about survival like that.
It's very Dune-pilled to me, where it's like one of the things the Taru keep coming back to is the fact that they lived in this walled city that was impenetrable, and that led them to this complacency. Whereas, like, and if you think about it, like, that's kind of like the capital on Arrakis, where it's like most of the people that live there are never going to set foot outside the city because they'll die of dehydration. Whereas, like, the Fremen or the Skelons, like, have suits that allow them to stay out there for extended periods of time. So it's stuff like that I think is a really cool touch and shows the cultural difference there. But yeah, they fell for the Trojan horse. Literally, it's the fall of Troy.
But I
The fall of Troy in this. Oh my god.
One of the major themes, I think, in a lot of different types of, like, especially medieval texts and medieval epics and ancient texts and ancient epics, is the responsibility of hospitality and the sacred, like, pact of hospitality, and how there is a fair amount of discussion in this of, like, war crimes, basically. Like, taking advantage of a declared peace, wearing enemy colors. Like, there's a bunch of different things that happen that now have been specifically barred by the Geneva Conventions because they make living in a civil society worse. Like false surrenders and things like that. But especially this breaking troth, this breaking oath of, like, if you... Because the whole thing with the fall of Tar, the first Trojan horse that they deal with is this refugee fighter they find. Yes. And they're so moved by his story that they just accept him into the fold, and everything transpires.
And he is a bastard. His name is Scathmod.
Yeah.
He's a villain. We hate him.
There's also traitors within their ranks too. Let's pay mind.
Yes.
No,
but yeah, I love this as a trope. This is what feeds into the Red Wedding. This is stuff we are still playing.
Yeah, totally. I think about the Red Wedding too. Like, that was kind of the first thing I thought of. And I think because of Game of Thrones was such a cultural bomb, like both in the sense that, like, it exploded and also in the sense that it bombed, was it like people attribute that trope to that when that is one of the oldest things in all of storytelling.
It is.
So
that's one of the first.
Like, that goes back to, like,
breaking
Beowulf.
hospitality.
I think Beowulf has some shit about that.
It does.
As
yeah.
does getting a little gay with the homie.
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up.
Kissing the
I
homies
was thinking
goodnight.
of Epic of Gilgamesh. You gotta be kissing Enkidu goodnight. It's important.
I want to talk about Dead Wife, Moonward.
Dead Wife Moonward is my favorite Friends of the Table character, actually.
Names in this are great. That's it. I think she's great. She plays that tragic heroine pretty well.
She dies off screen, unfortunately, but
I kind of love that, honestly.
This is one of those changes that you were talking about, Alice, and kind of the form of the poetry, because they do the battle, they come back on the colony ship, they're feasting, and then Kin-Bright is called upon to basically deliver the story of the fall of Tar, and then it switches to first person, and she delivers this whole story with the betrayal and the Trojan horse that is literally a giant horse mech thing. I like that it has 6 legs like Schleppnir. I think that's really fun. And then, and it's talking about, like, her wife had been sleeping next to her when she had the prophetic dream, and she woke up, and her wife was a person who was in charge of housing and communal blocks, if I'm remembering correctly. So she was more in the civil engineering side of things.
She died
was
like
part of the
evacuating
effort.
refugees. Yeah. So that's basically what her deal was. But yeah, I think that's one of those. Well, actually, you were already saying it, right? Like that's the shakeup of the original tragedy.
I'd like to read a quote about Moonward and his wife. Spoiler, they came out of the horse. Shit's going bad. Once the wall, they had breached their own wall to move the horse in, which is critically important to this.
Like, I get it. The horse is cool, man, but
also I love how they address the fact that, like, ramparts and walls still have purpose because shield domes exist and they are very easy to maintain. And this city is poised on a cliff face with access to fresh water that they're trying to mine, but they're being countermined. It's siege tactics in a mecha is wild to me. But so they go in, shit's going wrong, and so of course muster to your quarters, go and grab a weapon. So they meet down in the hangar. And I'm going to read this quote because this is their last interaction, and it's adorable. Be well, she whispers. Fight to live. Survive. Be well, I say, and look with wrath-wet eyes. Foreseeing not the final gaze I give, unworthy gift. Her uniform she wears askew, and in her hands, those hands so firm, in close affection, so gracious and so soft, she side-arm hefts, full badly. I should beg, please stay. I do not beg. The giving heart I love in Moonward leads her to depart. Shit's bad.
It's raw.
God damn.
I do like that her telling conveys the urgency of and the terror of what was happening. Like, I really like this part of the poem.
Well,
like,
and also there's
oration
just
is
so
really
much cool mech shit. I mean, her mech was her father's mech in the sequence. It's called Caprice. It has cool drill arms. There's a mech in this that blew my fucking mind. It's called Dungeon Starving, and the way that it is described entering the battlefield is a vengeful child in shining vaunting steed, as when a snake on vile herbs engorged. Like, stop. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, okay. You know what's funny? I remember exactly where I was in my video game when that happened because I stopped in the middle of walking forward and go, what the fuck? And I backed it up and listened to that part again. That is such a vivid description. I just stopped.
It brings to mind something small and petulant, but it's a big ass mech. And it's like it's so villainous and twisted in the way that it's being described. A lot of the media that we've covered on the podcast has either been like it's visual so you can see it, or it's in a novel and it's like this mech has a jet skirt and big feet and a big domed head and looks like a person. No, we have never seen a vengeful child in shining vaunting steed as when a snake on vile herbs engorged. Like, let's go, you know?
I mean, we kind of have, but it was just Dylan Dow.
Shut the fuck up.
That's the closest we've gotten up to this point.
Get out of this podcast.
Okay, it's warm in this room. I'll leave.
So at one point, she gets a band of people together by sending out a burst transmission of coordinates, gets some other swords from familiar houses who come and join her. And they decide to, in any way, attack counterattack as best they can. They come across a squad and defeat them, and they decide to. The way they describe it is beautiful, but they steal their IFF signatures.
Yeah, this is when they commit the war crime.
Match it with the Spears IFF signature, and they use that to spring attacks on others, but then it immediately turns on them when they're trying to go to one of the cathedrals, and the priests, who are on the roof with laser cannons, just start lighting them up. They're like, oh shit, enemy. Bow, 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 bow.
And it's got dudes rock energy, honestly, if I'm being 100%, because they all rally on the point and are like, hey, do you want to die fighting with me, bro? And they're like, yeah, we would love to die fighting with you, bro. And then they just fucking go for it, and I love the energy.
Well, they're a warrior culture. The Tar put warriors above all else, and I love that continuous theme. There's also a really cool scene where Ataru's suit launches from a catapult into the air and is immediately lanced out of it by an enemy laser. And she's like,
keep shooting.
Fly.
Yeah.
Again, Fall of Arrakis vibes the whole time.
Fall of Arrakis vibes, Fall of Troy vibes. And then, you know, Nico, you invoked Escaflowne. We find an ancient mech that takes a blood offering.
Oh, yeah.
That shit rips.
I love this kind of shit. I do love, in counterpoint to Alice, I do love the Arthur C. Clarke, any technology that is sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic shit, especially if you as the audience know that it's technology. And I mean, to be fair, Kin-Bright knows that this is technology. It's just extremely fucking old technology, and I love that. I love any setting where there's a depth of history that advanced technology has been around long enough to be ancient. Like, I just think that's really cool.
It's super, super dope.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
Offering. Just put your little blood in there.
And then Alice, what happens when we activate the god for the first time?
You have a vision. Avi.
This is exactly what
obviously
happened to my friend Commander Shepard.
Shit. But okay, so they crash into this temple, and I do want to pay homage to this. She's like, she crashes in this temple, and she's like, shit, my suit's lost power, the caprice is down. And then she says, the crowbar for emergencies I grip. You just got a crowbar in this suit to wrench yourself out if you need it.
It reminds me of in the seminal science fiction film Avatar by James Cameron, when the mech suits in that just have a rear view mirror, like a car rear view mirror in them. It's exactly that to me.
I gotta say, as someone who has been working with a crowbar a lot recently, I'm infected now. I'm not gonna be able to pick that thing up without thinking my crowbar emergency gripped.
So you activate the death god with your blood. You pinprick your blood, and then you raise up through the temple roof and unleash holy light energy to kill all of your enemies. Fucking iconic. So, to be clear, the key is a mech that exists inside of the god or talks to the god?
It can do either. It's the most of the time when we see it activated, Kin-Bright is in the key outside of the god, activating it remotely. But later we'll get a moment where she actually goes in there with the key and does it from within, like Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann style.
So it's just Super Fortress Macross, right?
It's Macross. Thaliarchus specifically calls it the Ideon, which is basically Macross anyway. So yeah,
so good, so good.
And then we get the going home, which is where we start to get so many nouns.
Oh yeah,
I was really lost here for a little while.
I have ample notes. I followed all of it. So we meet the Reformation Lutheran Church, as well as... No, this took a turn. I really liked where they went with this.
Yeah, this got very complicated. So they arrive in their home system, and it took me a while to get here, but my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that there are 2 planets here. One is called Reform, and it is controlled by the force Refcom, which is like the main wealthy people that they actually have to introduce themselves to. The other planet is called Rock. It's like a desert planet, and that's where the Ray Gult people live.
You are wrong.
I am wrong. Okay,
wow.
Tell me how I'm wrong.
They both live on the healthy planet. The Rock planet just has nomads on it and drilling platforms.
Oh, okay. Good. But I'm not wrong about the actual meaning of the nouns, though. So that's at least, that was what I was like.
Correct about the nouns.
Yeah.
They're just on the good, healthy planet that.
Yeah.
So the reason our protagonists are going there is because they had these coordinates as a home that they could go to as a livable planet. And they find that some ancestors had a schism and stayed there. And one decided to try democracy and one kept a feudal system.
One thing I do love about this section is the discussion of how these cities and places came to be. Because, like, we're told during the Fall of Tar segment that it was, like, a glittering city, but it was the only city on its planet because it had been a colony site where, like, ships were dropped off and they were terraforming. And I like that analogy to the city-states of the ancient period, like Athens and things like that, because it's like you were saying, like, you had to send a runner to the town over to find out what was going on with them. We didn't know a lot about the spaces we inhabited yet. You kind of had your area that you staked out and you had your resources and you tried to build up, but then, like, if you were driven from that area, you could be wandering a long time before you found another good place to set up.
100%.
And I think it's an interesting approach to the sci-fi problem of one planet, one culture. And I like that this immediately defies it. And, you know, this is one planet, two cultures. Then if these cultures get introduced, like, I like that a lot. But I also like that it kind of lines up with ancient city-states. I thought that was some cool symmetry.
Yeah.
Hey guys, let's talk about the refugee crisis.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm very excited to talk about Standalone Complex next year. I think we've been pretty obvious about that coverage.
Fuck yes.
Because both seasons of Standalone Complex are extremely about this. This was so interesting to me. Basically, you know, they arrive and they talk to Refcom, and Refcom is like, you can have a shitty little peninsula on the shit planet, I guess, is basically what the vibe is there.
Well, it's quite funny because there's two cultures, and the one that is most akin to them is like, nope, those fucking liberals over there who let their people vote can deal with these goddamn refugees. We ain't doing shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough, right? But what I do like is that there's a couple lines, and this is one of those things that's really great about poetry because this is so open to interpretation. But my read on this is there's a couple lines that seem to implicate Refcom as seeing the Taru return, having made this extraordinary journey, having survived this horrible thing, and are ashamed that they have grown complacent. They don't have the same kind of warrior culture. They don't have the same kind of like warrior's pride or nationalistic pride. And so they use that petulantly along with their power to relegate the Taru to this shitty little peninsula, which is just it's so interesting, and it's so cool how that can kind of just be hinted at by this flowery, like, metered structure. You know what I mean?
I was thinking a lot about the fact that, like, because one of the sticking points is that they have a language similar enough that they can communicate right off the bat. They clearly have tongues that diverged from a mother
tongue. And they
tongue.
share household gods as well.
Yeah. And I was thinking a lot about English and Spanish, honestly, because, like, a lot of people will make those jokes about, oh, this meme, transcends cultural boundaries. And it's just because there's shared cognates. Like, there are words in Spanish and words in English that come from the same roots so that we generally can understand them. And it's like, sometimes you will read a meme in Spanish or French and be like, oh, I actually can read exactly what this says, even though I don't speak that language, because at some point in the past, our tongues did diverge. And there's enough shared DNA there. Yeah, in esta economia. Just like that kind of shit. And I was thinking a lot about that and about how much language is used as, like, speak American, speak English, kind of scream at refugees or foreigners and stuff. And it's like, the tongues did diverge. We come from a mother language or a romantic language. Like, I was in my feelings about that when there was a specific, like, couple of lines about the fact that their languages were similar enough to communicate, and it seemed like Refcon was almost, like, disgusted by that.
Well, it's, so they lean into it a lot, and I do like the how they paint Refcom as a democratic society that also has media. The god of fame is alluded to with her peacock feathers often, and how there are some slander pieces that are like, so how the planet, their old home, became the way. So the Tar left and went and found Taru 300 years ago. And at some point, there was a great famine that caused a fraying of their home planet, and many different factions splintered. And then a warlord rose up who unified a lot of the different clans, but instilled democracy through force of arms. She created law that way. And they've done this, and they've gotten to this point, and they talk later on about how, like, rather than their suits of armor being, passed down through families, they've forgo that for a volunteer army. And the derision that is leveled at Refcom by Tar for them having this, and why they are more akin to the other kingdom, is like, oh, they still have great houses and good warriors. And we see these like shitty little soldier mechs that can't really do much. And they're really bogged down by indecision. And Thani makes some pretty hilarious allusions to how democracy can fail in ways like this. I have another quote. A swamp for wit, for wisdom, mazy marsh. Mere silver truce these are, confused, absurd. So gold fell with wrathful on the table struck. No thanes with wit would lead a nation thus. My Hathel lord and dread, a cunning road they take, that high blood hands might still wield secure. Great wealth they need to win the choice of folk in leadership selection game. He's saying, oh yeah, they elect people, but only rich people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
can do it.
Everyone remember Citizens United?
I also think that this is interesting. I think that we're supposed to also be skeptical of this viewpoint as it stands as well, because there's some hypocrisy here, right? They have a meeting later about who is going to actually lead the Taro now that they've like kind of found some stability. And a lot of people think that it should be Kin-Bright, but the main objection is that Kin-Bright is as that clan Kin is too poor. And it's like, you just talk shit about this.
I like the
And also,
contradiction.
They send the Thanes away. It is lords meeting with lords deciding lordship. They are so dismissive of this culture of letting the common, because they treat their common folk, their Thanes and their thralls and their halls with a reverence. And it's in old feudal lordships, the lord protected and provided for the people under him. That is how a house has power.
Noblesse oblige. Yeah.
Exactly. And they still do that. So for them to see this of like, and there's a very mild allusion to some of the things seeing what Refcom is doing, and they're like, what? We that sounds cool. Could we do that? And it's given no mind. They don't even think about democracy. They're like, nope, we have to choose our new king.
I think this is really interesting because it brought to mind for me a lot of the Return with a V stuff that's popular in certain circles where people, where people are like really disillusioned with the way that politics and sociality and like society works these days. And so they think the solution is to go back to like strongman governments and like, well, if we simply had a strong leader who was in place for more than a certain term, then we would sort all this shit out. And whether that's coming from the reactionary side or even like a leftist side, people calling for we need a climate Stalin and stuff like that. Like, I think there is a comfort in the idea. There's an appeal and a romanticism in the idea of like, well, if we simply had a just king, we would have no concerns. But yeah, no, I love that this is like satirizing it in the text by having the orator be skeptical of it, and then also immediately illustrating the fallacy of being skeptical of it when your government runs like this.
Also, the Refcom news is like, damn, look at this hot Kin-Bright lady. Shit, she's fierce and charming. Women swooning.
I like that they specifically point out that the way the news coverage happens, I mentioned this earlier, it is specifically othering Kin-Bright.
Yes.
It's like, oh, she was first off the ship and she looks like she's a bad bitch. It's like the thing where some people can only talk about black celebrities by saying like, step on me. There's like this projected aggression onto Kin-Bright that then makes it easier to other her later and then to like stand by and do nothing later.
Yep. I am totally with you on that. It's a good detail. I want to talk about Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon.
Yeah, we're just going to pivot in the middle of the episode.
We're going to pivot.
Go on.
There is a mission in Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon, and due to the timeline meetups, I have to think that Thaliarchus knew about this mission. Because what happens during this mission is you have to go out and defeat an old Rubiconian superweapon. This weapon is a giant worm. You have to fight and get the worm into the correct position so that someone else off-field, charging their Evangelion super sniper rifle, can shoot it in the fucking face. It is one of the most cinematic and heart-pounding missions in like any video game I've ever played, and it is literally what they end up doing with this giant worm dragon. I loved this again, so much.
This is an ancient trope, right? This is Arthur pursuing the questing beast. I love especially when there's any kind of party or like pair that go hunting, because it always comes down to somebody played an important role and then somebody took the killing shot. And then like part of your sexy banter is just like, oh, well, you're the one who killed it because you got it in position. Oh, well, you're the one who killed it because you struck the killing blow. And all the people in your hunting party are like, we are tired. We are covered in mud. We need to go. It's really good. I love this.
I think it's also an interesting, it precludes an interesting cultural difference that I suspect will come up in more vigor in later books, which is just that the Scalond people are seem to be a great deal more egalitarian than the Taru. Because the main, it's not really an argument. It's very lighthearted in nature, but the main onus of it is that, Kin-Bright wants Kin-Bright to have the trophy because she actually did the labor and it was her strategy that won them the fight. Whereas, and that to me speaks to a more egalitarian mindset than Kin-Bright being like, you should get the credit because you pulled the trigger.
Yeah, I really think that's interesting. Because yeah, in Kin-Bright's culture, all that matters is like who did the final blow.
Yes. Who last hit that minion?
Right? Who last hit the minion and got the gold?
Kill stealing, the highest form of treason in the...
Yeah.
I do want to come out and say book 5 is my favorite of the books, and it's just because it's peaceful compared to the rest of these people's journey. Well, they're making camp together, and they really lean into the fact that Courtheart daily to the kin would go gay. But they like they've tethered their machines together so they can share data more efficiently, because the Taru machines are different than their bulky allies, and they're coming up with strategies, and like there is nothing sexier than two warlords meeting over battle plans and making longing looks at each other.
Yeah, but like the Taru, when they approach the situation of like comporting themselves, again, hospitality rules, comporting themselves as good guests in Refcon space, they look to these people and are like, okay, we are one rung below them. So we need to like form connections with them. We need to approach from behind them, because technically, I don't know, there was this feeling that like they were in line first to be recognized by Refcon, which, as we find out, is just not something Refcon's interested in doing. But like there is this effort by the Taru and you know, their companion people to like get to know the locals if they want to be good neighbors in this interesting way. And that means that the locals go to them for help when the steam drake becomes a problem, which is really cool.
They drop everything to go help too. Like they didn't have to do that. I love it because
there's this heroic moment when the poor person comes and is like, we don't have the gold to hire you. We can't even tell you that this won't be much of a test of your efforts. This dragon or this steam drake could damage your machines in a way that we could not compensate you for. But it has stolen someone away. It has stolen a princess. I think it's a prince actually in this. It has stolen someone away and is gonna eat him, but he has a little bit of time. Could we please? And like, before he can finish his sentence, Kin-Bright is like, give me the mech. I gotta go fight a dragon. It's so good. It comes into play later, but like the Taru just seem to... They cannot understand why you would stand by and watch something bad happen if you had the potential and the ability to act. And that comes into major play later, especially with that character you really like, Brian.
At the end of this chapter, the most important part of this chapter, and Kin-Bright thought she felt in murk of night On cheek, the faintest feather touch of lips.
Oh.
For blessing, or for nearness, or for both.
When she hits you with the cheek kiss.
I'm so gay.
When she clasps you tenderly and then hits you with the deniable cheek kiss. Oh.
Yeah. And then this is also where they talk about how Kin-Bright should probably try and is kind of the general outcome of the dinner party. Shit goes to hell. I was hooting and hollering. I lost a stanza. I was scrolling and I accidentally went to the next page too soon. And all of a sudden they were being invaded by pirates again. Like, it happened so fast. Like,
when the brigands are back.
These motherfuckers have a big ramming ship. They have depth charges that spawn more enemies. They are crazy.
And like the situation has changed because they were fighting in space before. Now they're fighting planet side. There is and in space, but like they have like two fronts almost. There's a really interesting thing that is discussed about the difference between like the Taru and the Brian. What's the name of the other of Queer Hearts people again?
Skellond.
Okay. Between the Taru and the Skellond, because there's literally just like a few lines devoted to the fact that the Taru are breathing in deeply and gratefully to be planet side and enjoying the air and everything, and like, oh, finally it doesn't smell like recycled farts and the inside of a spaceship. And the Skellond are just like, okay, casual, sounds like a you problem. I would simply get used to it. And so I love that is in play, and now we have like a space and a ground battle that is having to happen as this force reappears.
And Kin-Bright 2, still nearly hourly found, a time to stop, the air with joy to gulp. At this court-heart gentle teasing start, for Skellond folk, to shipborne air inerd, in life on holes between the stars all raised, amusing found the depth of friends' new breasts. You ever just make fun of your girlfriend because she likes air?
Okay, air liker.
I have a question about how this story breaks down.
Yeah.
Am I to understand that some of the pirates are Refcom people in disguise or something? There's a betrayal here, I feel like, and I don't know exactly what the deal is.
My understanding was it was more of a betrayal of inaction. But yeah, go ahead, Alice.
Well, the inaction is done specifically by the Regalt people, I thought, not necessarily Refcom. I thought Refcom had shown up in some way.
So both Regalt and Refcom send forces when this enemy fleet appears above the rock. However, the Regalt forces maintain a long distance to show the Refcom people, you're the ones who gave them that land. You're the ones who have to protect them because you're their quote-unquote lord, and they're following the old rules of what a lord should do with a guest. And the Refcom people, unfortunately, it's a volunteer army. They don't have a thirst for victory, for title. Okay.
That's what it was.
So they're kind of doing running and shot fights, and then at the end, when God takes an angry, powerful laser shot, shoots it into the sky, and it lands near Refcom's capital off in the water. And that's when Refcom is pissed, because they're like, oh, you took a shot at us after we did nothing to help you. This is great. What are our highlights? Because this is the big fight in the first 10 books. This fight goes on over forever. Multiple books.
In a good way, but it is so long.
It is so long. So a couple of highlights for me. The shield that the brigands drop.
Oh, yes.
What the fuck?
We love an unknowable Aegis. It simply must be said.
They drop this shit. Even God can't burst it with its laser on the first shot. It's wild.
Some of my highlights are the interactions that Kin-Bright keeps having with Mushat, who again is just standing there watching. And at first she's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Sorry, like I cannot go against orders. They told us to sit here."
Mom said I can't come join your fight.
And then the second time he is like, "I desperately wish I could help. Like I feel so terrible because I feel like I'm being a bad host, but like I can't do it." And this is my line read. She says, "Your sensibility tomorrow lives. Each moment we speak, my people die. As sure as if you had wished them dead, they die. Your fellow feeling might as well be hate for all the good it does." The contact cut without awaiting answer. To war again she turned.
She said, "Clat."
Yeah.
She hung up.
Fuck.
The other highlight I have is a specific mech. It's called Nightingale of Needles. This fucking motherfucker has a sound cannon.
Yeah, I love that. There are so many moments. Okay, so like I said, I was listening to the reading of this, and there's a moment where Thaliarchus took a pause to rest their voice. I don't know why I keep they-theming them. He took a pause to rest his voice and looked at chat, and somebody was like, wait, hold on. Does that mech have a sound cannon? And he just casually was like, yeah, that's why it's called the Nightingale, like it refers to the song. And then just goes back to reading the font. I'm like, I want to see the lore in the world building notes. This shit is crazy.
My main highlight for this exchange is Sheaftal, who pilots the Hellebore Hulk. So during the defense on the bulwarks, they come across a younger armor, a hesitant armor, and Kin-Bright speaks to this pilot, and she has recently ascended to a pilot status from her hall lead. And their interaction, and I really love a new warrior and old warrior, because Kin-Bright really is, I mean, they're an old warrior, though they'll say they're young. What cause sets you and I in armors here, when many others flimsy fighters steer, or go on foot with feeble tools to fight? And why do sheaf and kin among the folk in height of honor stand, when we as guests among the nameless humble ones go forth? Why is it that our cups are ever filled, and choicest flesh well loads the dining dish? Come, be we great indeed as well as look, shine both in gold and in flame of fight. For only then will those who lack a name about us say, no mild hearts, these our lords, who wield might and have us at their call, and best of fruits and wines and meats enjoy, like fighting scarabs, fearless when in brawl. Such thrusts as menace tar, they rush to face. You have to earn your people's love through
And your
war.
meats. You have to earn your love and your meats. Okay? It's important.
Also, fuck command. Oh, do we say that yet? Fuck command.
Yeah.
Well, they die anyway, so.
Hey,
Yeah.
okay. Here is my biggest clarification I need from both of you. When did command die? When did Kin-Bright and command die?
I don't know. I am unclear on this too. I just knew that they died because at some point, Kin-Bright, in the middle of this fight, is like, yo, everyone's dead. I'm the queen now. And everyone's like, okay, cool.
Well, I don't remember when he dies, but the king in name only does this very funny, like, comm call where he calls in and he's like, hey, I'm dripping with the blood of a sacrificed animal. Did that for you guys. Kiss, kiss. Unfortunately, that's kind of all I can do. So if you can go fight, that would be great. And it, like, cracked me up because he's just like, hey, I'm going to keep sacrificing animals. Don't worry. I'm on it. But also, good luck. And it was very funny.
He literally, to sacrifice some beast more fit, I go.
He's like, I'm gonna go look around
guys,
and see
I'm
if we
just
got
gonna
anything
keep
else I
killing
can kill.
goats. Also, they just have goats on their ships that they keep in pristine condition.
Oh my god, I loved what Thaliarchus had to say about this on the live stream, because somebody in the chat was like, they've just got goats on their ships, and Thaliarchus is like, well, in the retelling of this, things are purposefully not clear. They have something like goats. And I'm like,
Space goats!
He's doing the thing. Like, he's doing that, like, well, this author did their best to translate this epic ancient story.
He's doing the Gene Wolfe thing.
And it's like, yeah, that's exactly. He's doing the Gene Wolfe thing. It's like, I don't know if these were actually goats, but, close enough. I love that. It's like goats that are not goats. Anyway, my favorite part was, of course, the dramatic sacrifice at the end of My Name is Earl.
Shut the fuck up!
My name is Earl.
So, this is wild what they do with the tongue, by the way. That's where they live on the rock. They live on the tongue on the rock.
They live in Space Desert, Florida, but they call it the tongue. Okay. This man, Earl of Hawks, about faced the camera last book and said, I am going to die. Because he was like, you know what? No matter who becomes king, I think I'm going to retire and live out my days on the beach chilling. No, you're dead. That's death. That's a death flag.
Yeah, it went out and hoisted high his banners of death.
Yeah.
It was very funny, but still his sacrifice was very cool.
Very cool. So, Alice, what happens here? Did they take off with the continent?
That is correct. So, the peninsula, to be clear,
Or yeah, the peninsula. Sorry.
To get the god to do something for you, you have to pinprick, and it enacts a toll on your soul, which I love that shit. And there's this very specific scene where she calls her girlfriend, and her girlfriend's like, "Oh, your eyes. Oh, no, I'm not going to acknowledge the fact that your eyes are soulless right now as your commanding god." But yeah,
Don't worry about it, babe.
What the key does is tell the god, "Hey, fuck this shit, we're taking the whole thing," and calls to everybody, all the soldiers, "Hey, we're getting out of here," which includes me putting an entire anti-gravity field around this entire continent and lifting it up into space and then into the fold with us, which is fucking... And all she gets is a nosebleed from it and her soul leaving her eyes. But yeah, they literally, like, pick it up. Everybody scrambles to get spacesuits on before they leave Atmo. And they just leave after defeating the laser that would have blown them out of the air that the skulls brought. But 100% mecha moves of all time, by the way.
This is the sickest shit ever.
I would simply take the continent. I would simply lift it.
I would simply save all of my people.
Listen, if you're in Gunbuster and you're not just like relocating your planet to fight entropy, like what are you doing?
So then a bunch of crazy fold shit happens, and unfortunately, we like go outside the boundary line of reality. They no-clip through the universe and see the truth accidentally.
Yeah, they went deeper in the dream. they were in the fold and then they folded again.
It's legal and you can do it. Hey, Thali-chan. Oh, okay. My boy Thali-chan. So you go deep into the fold and they find a fucking dying Dyson sphere. A Dyson sphere around a dying sun. And they've alluded to the Forerunners before, when people talk about them, where all this technology come from. And then they're just like, oh, and then we're just gonna go here because that's where our dead go.
Yep.
And okay, you guys are more English nerds than I. You've read more Beowulf than I ever will. This happens a lot where you go to the underworld, right?
Oh, it happens a fucking lot. I mean, the whole thing around Ishtar.
Yeah. And also, it specifically happens in the Aeneid, which is what this is based on. They specifically go there, and that is where the protagonist learns that he is destined to become the king of Italy. Or sorry, not the king of Italy necessarily, but the ancestor to the Roman people, which is basically the king of Italy.
The Italy planet in Star Wars?
The ancestor of Naboo.
Kin-Bright's gonna go be the queen of Naboo, yes.
At least the Fits will fuck. No, the journey to the underworld is a really cool and really common like trope in a lot of epic stories. And I think it says something about like our relationship and interest in and simultaneous fear of death and like not wanting to let people go. I think it also probably has something to do with the fact that a lot of us came out of caves. Like, just looking at ancient history and, like, recent archaeology finds and things like that, I think, like, humans kind of have an ancestral memory of, like, having been in caves and burying people in caves. And so there is, like, a literal subterranean theme throughout. And I think this is such an interesting version of it, because we're not going underground anywhere. We're going deeper into a space outside of reality, which is really cool.
And they're... in the process
Why
of
are we going to the Dyson sphere?
Because it's
just
there. Yeah.
It seems like it's our dead, right?
Well, I think it is relevant that they lost Tar fairly recently.
They also lost a bunch of Skelanders escaping. Like a bunch of Skelon people died.
True.
Yeah.
So
there are a lot of really fresh losses that they're thinking about.
But okay, and then the other thing that happens is they meet Wovengate, which is I think basically Sharon. And he says that they aren't actually going to see any Skelons because if you die in the fold, you don't get to go to the underworld or something.
No, what the Skelons do is they send their dead into fold space. So other cultures will like ensure a safe passage to the afterlife, but part of them is it's kind of like if you die at the sea, you just stay in the sea and your soul doesn't get bonded to any of your ancestral burial grounds. Whereas, Okay, so I love specifically one of the main tropes and what we come to approach is that Kin-Bright and Moonward were going to get wed, but they had not yet gone through the ceremony of exchanging names.
This fucked me up.
And in their specific culture, if you do not share the same last name, you don't go to the same death hall because death halls are by clan.
Yeah.
And so by not exchanging names the night before the fall, she will never have eternal rest with Moonward. Moonward will always be in a different burial hall.
Yeah, she'll be in the Hall of the Moon People because her name was supposed to be changed to Kinward if they had actually observed the correct. That fucked me up so bad I had to like lay down for a while.
Quethart and her people do not have house names. She has a pilot name, but no house name because they do not have houses because they're nomadic, which is, I love it in a, I watched Vikings too many times kind of way.
Hell yeah.
But also, guys, we did it. Yuri aquarium scene on a
Yuri aquarium.
Dyson
Yes.
sphere.
So what do we think of this? This is where we get the most stark poetry change. We are gonna rhyme here. This is like an altered state of mind. I talked about this with Thaliarchus, but this is supposed to represent like the way that reality has become surreal around them, has changed their form of speech and their experience and the way they interact with the world on the page, which is so cool.
This is what I mean, where if you are a prose writer, if you are a game designer, you need to be reading poetry because this is an approach you can apply to anything, and it is done so cool here. It is such a stark change. It changes the way everything sounds. It is completely different, and it puts you in that space. You know, it's not like you're looking at the PDF and now there's like a weird warped filter on the page. It literally, the text of the thing has changed to convey the changed circumstances and the changed reality in such a way that it's just so cool. Poets can teach you this for free on itch.io.
Follow the rainbow fish down the Yuri aquarium hall and you will find a beautiful land.
I remember reading that book when I was a child. Follow the rainbow fish down the Yuri aquarium hall. That one.
I remember that too. Yeah.
It had the scales that were iridescent on the book.
Yeah, I love the way that they go through this Dyson sphere, and like it's still a very functional Dyson sphere where the Chthonics live.
The Chthonics, yeah.
The Chthonics live. But then they get inside and hey, this person knows Dyson spheres because they're like, there are no birds here. Yeah, they don't know what the fuck to do. But they also use the fish as the artificial sun. They're a luminescent fish that move around the Dyson sphere to create an artificial sun, which is wild.
It's so fucking cool. There's like cloud castles, like so much cool shit is in this part of the story.
But the coolest part, the tents.
Oh, yeah, they got DIA.
We gotta do some camping. We gotta talk about each other.
What if there was one tent? No, I'm kidding.
And then
what if we went to the underworld space station Dyson sphere and there was only one bed?
I'm trying. Lesbians can't do anything normal. They can't just like meet in coffee shops anymore. It's always got to be going to the dying Dyson sphere to find one tent. Like, come on.
So having read a lot of like Greek poetry and history and stuff, this retelling of an underworld, which is also a physical space that they're exploring, is just, it's so well done. This is so evocative. I loved it. But I have a reading to do from this section. Of course I do. So they have to go as a pair because one has to act as witness, and they realize that this is also so neither of them are pulled by the dead into the depths of hell. And so she's like, now why a pair these ways must walk I see, for each as other's keeper here we stand. So let us each toward her peer agree. And saying this, she took her fellow's hand, by fingers lace and locked, the road that spanned the rock now on they trod, the warmth of flesh, their minds alerted, gave boldness, springing fresh. These girls gay as fuck.
They're so
Do you
gay.
ever hold hands so that you remember you're alive? I think Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls should have been about that instead of bleeding and stuff.
It reminds me so much of Heavenly Mind because of the way that like they are constantly reminding each other that they are human still. It's
As they're
lesbians.
actively meeting ghosts, by the way.
I love women.
Yeah.
I love
Well,
women.
yeah, this is something women will just do if you ask.
I
Yeah.
love the world building here also of, this is actually like because of some technological fuckery from people who wanted to cheat death. Like, that's why ghosts exist.
I love when there's like a plausible
Yes.
reason why something happened. Like, okay,
So good.
everybody has told somebody, everyone who's played it has told somebody else to play the Outer Wilds. The Outer Wilds has something like this in it that when I experienced it, like the technological explanation for something that seemed inexplicable, and one of my favorite ways is that it is left behind carelessly, and then like we have to reckon with it in the future. It makes me think about when we try to plan for how we're gonna warn people about nuclear waste in 10,000 years, because it's still gonna be dangerous. Like, I love shit like this, but especially just careless danger left behind. I love that.
But the real reason we're going down here is not to find a home for our people. It's to do two things. Number one, introduce them
Hold
to Dad.
hands. Okay.
So Dad can be like, hey, who's this handsome knight next to you? Can I know, daughter? What's going on? And then for your new queen to meet your dead wife.
Yeah.
This shit ripped me. I was crying, guys.
Yeah. It's really beautiful.
What is the other thing they have to do, Alice?
The other thing that the actual lore reason or the reason I care about what comes up after they get out of the hole.
Give us both. Why
Okay.
not?
Yeah. So they go down and they meet a disgraced empress. So in the lowest of the low is where the people who really fucked up are. And they meet a disgraced empress who tells tale of where their god came from. The god that the key unlocks. Did they actually get the name from her?
I don't
I
know.
don't
Ask her for the
remember.
name. And I was like, there was one name she dropped.
They
that
might
I
have,
was
but
like,
then
is that
they
it?
still just refer to it as the god afterwards. I'm pretty sure. So
Wait, I think it was witch something, or was that her name? Anyway,
I do not remember.
so they go down. They get this knowledge that she should appeal to the god to lead them to where the god was born from, and that is where they will find a place that is not mapped and that they can find solace. But then after they get out and she's gotten the okay, you know what? Moonward tells her, hey, girl, you gotta be straight up. Kin-Bright is pretty fucking stupid and she ain't gonna make the first move. You gotta go for it, girl. You can do it, Galco-chan. And so what you do is you get next to the fire after going to hell. You hold the hand of your beautiful wife. You tell her her hands are so small and calloused for her people and how much you love her. And then Kin-Bright says 60 times that night in the one tent you share how much she loves you back. And you wake, nestled in the bosom of each other, not wanting to get up out of bed because your love is too grand and too bright, more than any sun that would wake you. Gay as fuck. Here it is. Now stir not up, unloving dawn brought light, between my breast, like deer midst lilies fed. My love I hold and have no need for sight. But they leave, they go back. And yeah, that's how we wrap up book 10 for the first half of Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright is they fuck in a tent.
Yeah.
Yep.
They fuck hard.
Yep.
On the Death Dyson Sphere. It's
in
important.
the Death Dyson Sphere with no birds.
The birds aren't back.
Are not
I do
back.
like
Yeah.
the one scene. They're exiting the shuttle, and Kin-Hard clocks it pretty much immediately. He's like,
Oh,
"Okay,
yeah.
finally, fuck."
He's like, you're glowing. Oh.
I do love that. It's just like, oh, I didn't need to know that, but also, I guess this works out.
So yeah, that is where we end up. Any kind of final thoughts on this before we do our due diligence?
I want to shout out one book for readers who might not know how gay ancient history was. There's a wonderful book. It's very short, called How to Be Queer, an Ancient Guide to Sexuality, written by Sarah Neuter.
Thank God the ancients left us the wisdom.
It's beautiful. It's very short, and it just has some excerpts, but specifically chapter 3 about girlfriends. It translates some poetry by Alkman that are just very eerie, and I think it really comes through in Kin-Bright, some of Alkman's poetry. That's it. I want to attribute that to this.
I love that Alice, you always joke that you don't read, and yet look at you. You had a book in your hand.
Yep.
Listeners can't see it. Alice pulled out a whole paper-ass book.
Can't prove that. Can't prove it.
Screenshot, and I'm kidding. Well, I guess my final thoughts are, like I said before, it is really cool and really rewarding to see someone undertake a work of this length and this intricacy and this, like, historical, like, tradition and perform it and, like, do this whole undertaking about something that they're passionate about, which is contemporary, which is fun, which is queer, which is just, like, I love it. I think we have a lot more queer novels than we used to, of all sorts of varying quality, which is great. I think back in the day, kind of something people would say is like, I hope that there's enough queer literature someday for some of it to be bad, you know, and some of it to be good. You can't, you know, because it used to be so rare that you just had to accept whatever came out and just, like, defend it with your life, even if you kind of thought it was shit.
Yeah.
And, like, now we thankfully are living in the beautiful times where it's like we're not only getting a lot of different types of queer writing and mech writing and people exploring sci-fi spaces in new and interesting ways. We're getting enough of it that we can get weird with it and have a project like this.
Yeah, that was basically going to be my final thought too, which is just that, like, I needed this reminder that human will and creativity persists and is pervasive throughout the internet, even though oftentimes the search engine is going to very purposefully put the opposite of that at the forefront of your endeavors to find things, because the Alphabet company is literally, like, fucking from Cyberpunk 2077 at this point. So, you know, we're in that space, and
it's a good reminder about community.
I think it's incredibly cool that someone can sit on Twitch and evoke the exact same feeling as someone sitting in front of a campfire like 1,000 years ago.
I know. I kept thinking about, like, being in someone's, like, longhouse or hearth hall, and someone is, like, declaiming to the audience, and, like, people are taking different things away from it.
See, I had a background that got me into this too, which is I love women kissing.
Alice was like, I was able to perfectly envision the women kissing.
I envisioned that shit so hard.
Well, folks, our honor code calls, we must rate these goddamn mechs.
God under a lowercase goddamn mechs.
Lowercase goddamn mechs. Alice, what is your rating?
So I usually give, like, a full ass paragraph plus about my ratings on these things, but I just have to say nothing we've covered yet has so evoked an emotional connection to the mechs and their stories and their history in the armor of a warrior kind of way that just, it makes me so happy. I cried reading this. I was smiling ear to ear. I loved every different one that came up, all of their weird little schisms. This is a 10 out of 10.
Reasonable.
For me, like, I'm not gonna, like, front and be like, I could perfectly visualize all these mechs and they all looked wicked cool in my mind. Like, you're helped a little bit by the great cover art that Brian mentioned.
I didn't look at it, by the way, until after I read it, because I didn't want to have anything going in.
Yeah, but, I mean, the reality is, like, when we talk about books, but even more so, a lot of this is left in your mind's eye, and the poetry kind of gives you the outline or gives you specific features or gives you, it evokes certain ideas or feelings or images and stuff like that. But there isn't going to be a stanza where it's like, and this mech stood there and it was 20 meters tall and it had this loadout and it was styled after this animal or whatever. Like, there'll be bits and pieces of that throughout, but you really have to kind of construct those things in your mind, which leaves a really cool open idea space, but it also meant that sometimes I was kind of caught off guard going, oh, this is a different mech, or I was thinking about this differently, or, you know, there's definitely a little bit more sketchiness to the mechs in this. Not as in suspect, but as in, like, sketched, loosely described, compared to other stories we've read. I'm thinking notably about Iron Widow, which does kind of take those moments to give you like a paragraph, like, this is what color it is, this is what G type it has, like, this is what, you know. And I mean, your mileage will vary on that. That's why I would say that this is a 7. I think it's really cool. I think there's a lot of cool ideas here, but obviously, like, I was getting a little lost in the nouns. Not to say that's completely a bad thing. Like I said, your mileage will vary, but I'm going to be honest and say that I was at times confused about stuff, which made it harder to visualize. Brian?
I totally agree with you there. I think that sometimes, especially in elongated action sequences, I definitely had to read those pages like 3, 4, 5 times to like kind of get even like a passing grasp on what was happening. So far be it for me to go back on this, but something I keep drilling down on is when you don't have an image or a clear image, or even like with some of the stuff we've covered, a good and cool looking image of what you're dealing with, you're gonna have to fall back on what it does in the narrative. And unfortunately for me, when you have a mech that pilots a bigger mech that protects an entire fleet of ships and can lift a continent off the planet, like, without fail, that is going to hit for me every single fucking time. I love the god. I love the key. I didn't want to talk about it on the episode because we talk about it so much in the interview, but there is a lot actually that goes into the naming conventions that are in this. That I found so interesting. There's an anecdote that we'll get into that relates to Kin-Bright's first mech, the Caprice. That is incredibly good character work and world building detail that goes into that, and so much thought. So I originally had an 8 written down, but I was like trying to think. I was like, I don't think there's anything in this that I would sufficiently say took away from my experience of the mechs to knock it down from a 10. So I think I'm going to agree with Alice and give this one a 10. And that's where I'm at. Okay, well, I mean, with that said, we are going to take a break and then we're going to come back and I am going to absolutely torture the shit out of these two.
Oh shit. Oh my god.
Hey guys, Alice here. Thanks for listening to On the Shoulders of Giants. We're really happy you're here, but if you know anybody who might be interested, we'd love if you share our work with them. If you are enjoying what we're doing, maybe send us a message, or what would really help us out is if you leave a review online. Really, a lot of the algorithms will push people down if they don't have reviews, so it really helps if you just go and write something on the internet. Heck, we might even read one on the podcast if it's really nice and makes our hearts go doki doki. So if you could do that, maybe do it, and thanks again for listening. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back from the break. We are going to play a game, and that game is League of Legends. No, I'm just kidding.
No!
Oh, fuck.
This game is called Poetry for Thonics. In this game, I will be giving one of you a word in an IM. You must, within a minute, describe this word to the other person without using the word itself and only using 1 or 2 syllable words in your description. If you use words that have more than 2 syllables at any point, you do not get a point. You only get a point if the other person guesses correctly within 1 minute.
I'm gonna fucking die. Brian, I gotta go. There's been a farm accident. My god, a second plane has struck the barn.
Hey, Brian, hey.
Sup.
I'm too fucking stupid to play this game.
It'll be
Alice,
easy, don't worry.
I'm holding your hand in the underworld that is Brian's game. We are human, even if we get 0 points. All right, Brian, do it to us.
Forsooth, unleash upon me your ire's fold.
Sorry, I logged on to Alice's IMs, and the last IMs are Alice spam calling me and then posting a GIF of a hypnotized spiral saying, pick up the call, pick up the call. Anyway.
Forgot I did that.
All right.
That's the Alice experience.
I'm going to send you the IM. Let me know when you are ready, and I will start the timer.
Okay, perfect. And
you have to try to get it. You have to try to get me to guess what it is using words of only 1 or 2 syllables.
What the fuck is this word mean?
You can look it up.
This isn't a word. Can I?
Yeah.
Oh man. Hey, what was my favorite part of Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright? The dictionary I had to keep open while I read it. I am ready.
Okay, starting now.
Flower poke.
Stamen?
No.
Pistol.
Part that hurts when touch.
Stem. Thorn.
That. Plus dollar. What do you call
Thorn
dollar?
cash?
No.
Thorn money. Thorn buck?
Law paper.
Thorn
I'm just
bill? Thorn bill?
That's it.
You did it. See, this isn't that bad.
Okay, we are literally just playing.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm going against the rule by just sussing out the different parts of the word.
No, you know what? Any
Does
way
it count?
works.
Okay.
I didn't say you couldn't do that, so.
True. And our bond forged on the battlefield between our two societies, you in your weird ass suit and me in my skin tight suit. Anyway.
All right, Nico, I'm about to hit you.
Yeah, opening my DMs with Brian.
Remember, you're explaining this to me, a person who doesn't know words. I've never spoken English in my life.
Okay, I'm ready, Brian.
And go.
Find in cookie.
Chocolate chip. Flour. Butter.
Paper
Parchment.
in cookie.
Fortune.
Yes.
Yeah. Paper in cookie.
Okay.
Paper in cookie is so good.
Guys, remember the god Fortune kept fucking with people in this book? Anyway. I think I figured out where these words are from.
Apparently, Fortune is going to show up later, like as a entity.
I did write
As a
down.
god?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so excited.
I'm ready to suffer again, dear father.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, wait, okay. Part of me wants to try the harder, okay. Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Origami how?
Babe, origami has way too many syllables.
Yeah, unfortunately, that one disqualifies you.
I had to stop for a second. I'm like, damn, how many syllables are in origami?
I'm using the traditional Japanese kanji, which only has 2 characters. Does that count?
No, because Japanese is even more concerned with syllables than English.
Ah, no, I see.
Oh my god.
It was hyperspace fold.
Oh yeah.
Hyperspace or fold, and so I was doing origami fold paper, but I forgot that origami.
You could have said make crane.
Make crane. No.
Well, duh.
Make crane?
Sorry, it actually does have 2 syllables. Origami. That's it. That's what you gotta argue.
All right.
Jesus. Okay, this game harder than I thought. Me no word good. Me word with friend. Friend good word.
All right, Nico, I sent yours.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, go.
Make planet good for life.
Oh shit, what do you call that thing? Terraform.
Got it. I like that, Brian. Basically, the point of this game is just turning us into morons.
me smart. Me night queen. Me hold girl hand. Go fish place.
We read possibly one of the most challenging, beautiful, and well-constructed poems in recent memory on my part, and now we say fold. Me hold.
Me hold girl.
How
me
make a planet good for life?
Embrace.
Make planet good for life.
Oh, okay, Alice, here's yours.
This is brutal in its own way. Oh fuck. I'm ready.
Okay, and go.
English church bad. Make good how?
Reformation.
Less word.
Reform.
There you
Okay.
go.
We make English church good.
That's really good. I'm glad that's where you went first, not like, oh, it has shape. You went in English church.
Immediately went to Martin Luther.
Yeah.
Catch me with my 97 thesis pinned to the god Mech.
It was 99, but also I forgive you because you are a Protestant.
Shouldn't Protestants
Wait, that
know?
doesn't mean anything.
No?
Anyway.
Yeah.
Protestants would know. Anyway,
Why do you
I
think
forgive
I'm
you because you're
Protestant?
dumb and your brain is full of girls.
Because
Anyway,
you're
women
white
good.
Anglo-Saxon, and that therefore you must also be Protestant by the transitive property.
Does it get me a queen wife? Then I'll
Yeah.
do
Be
it.
any religion.
Yeah, your queen wife's name is though.
We'll bleep that in the recording.
Thank you.
Okay, Nico, here's
right.
yours.
Okay, I'm ready.
And go.
Steal stuff, eye patch.
Nico.
No.
What?
Larceny.
Person who steals stuff with
Jack
eye
Sparrow.
patch.
Jack Sparrow.
What is he?
Character played by actor.
My God.
Name movie.
Shit, what's he from?
You're doing this on
I forgot.
purpose.
Oh my god, it's Brigand?
Pirate.
Yes, thank you, Jesus Christ. What is he from? I fucking hate you.
I was almost like, is she doing this on purpose so that Nico doesn't get a point? All right.
Like the
Shit, what is he
worst.
from?
What is he from? Name movie.
what is-
See,
Name
see,
movie.
okay, Brian, you have just exposed a flaw in this game. If I wanted Alice to lose, I could simply pretend to be ignorant, but I would not, because that breaks the oath of fealty, or not the oath of fealty, that breaks the sacredness of hospitality.
Hospitality.
And this homie will not break troth.
I
Okay?
thought
I simply will not.
I thought of this. I actually had a disclaimer in my original description saying, please act in good faith. But then I was like, wait, it's actually kind of funny if they do that. So I took it off.
No, I act
I
with
always
honor.
act in good faith. I'm a Protestant woman, after all.
Okay, here we go, Alice.
Okay.
It's a good faith. Oh, fuck this one. Okay.
Ready? And go.
I'm ready. Actor, child,
Uh,
Christmas movie,
fucking Home Alone?
but not alone.
Home Together?
No, just first part.
Home?
Yeah, home.
There you go.
Okay. What's the opposite of Home Alone? Home Together?
I wanted to say Macaulay Culkin, but I caught myself because of syllables.
I thought this might happen. I'm so overjoyed. All of these words are in the poem, and not once have we tried to use the poem to get the other person to guess the word.
Culturally, all we have is Macaulay Culkin. We've immediately forgotten this poem.
I used the Reformation of the English Church.
A famous thing that happened in this poem.
In this poem, Martin Luther pilots a Mech.
And it is called the
called the
99 Theses. Yeah.
Same joke.
Got him.
Got him.
All right, Nico, here's yours.
Okay. All right. Word.
It's so fucking good.
Okay. All right. I'm ready.
All right, and go.
Die. Go down.
Dad. Barry.
Die.
Paul.
Go down there. To
The
place.
hell.
Yes.
Underworld.
Also. Yes. Die. Go down there. Place.
I go down there.
Did I go down
Place.
there?
That's what what's his name? Gatewind said, or whatever the fuck his name is. He said, die, go down.
Did I go
Your
down?
life die, go down. You die, go up. Unfortunately, sorry.
Go up, Baldy.
I'm fucking cooked. That's so good.
Oh my god. This is maybe the best game we've ever played. I know I say that almost every game, but this one is making me feel like a monkey.
All right, Alice, here's yours.
Okay.
Ready?
I
And
am ready.
Go.
My wife,
Bride?
but dead.
Moon word? Dead
But,
bride.
House name.
Oh, Moon?
Yeah.
Okay.
See, I tried to use the poem.
Yeah, look at Alice is like, I took that personally.
Now I know the rule. I almost grabbed the book and started flipping to pages to see how she was described, and then I was like, oh no, I'll get sad again.
All right, we do not have a bonus round. This is just simply the final point that can be given.
Okay.
Here is
Normal round.
It's normal. Okay.
Ryan just wants to make us look stupid. and it's not hard with me.
3, 2, 1, go.
Use the poem.
Genghis Khan was this.
Mongolian.
That's
Is the word Mongolian?
No, kill things.
Okay.
Have land. What Kin-Bright is.
No, I want you to, I know what it is. I just want you to work for it more.
What Kin-Bright is.
Lesbian.
No.
Hot. Stunning. Beautiful.
Fight.
A little stupid.
Fight battle.
Fierce.
Fight battle. Win. Booty.
She's a warlord.
Thank you.
There you go.
She got that booty. That's right.
I was sad when you said what Kin-Bright is, because I was like, at no point is she going to say cosmic blank Kin-Bright. That would be too easy.
Well, I was
Okay.
like Genghis Khan, and I'm like, Genghis Khan, sir, not appearing in this poem. I'm gonna back up a bit. And then I remembered Kin-Bright was like 2 syllables.
Then I remembered Kin-Bright was 2 syllables. Truly.
Listen, I have a lot of appreciation for the sound that using meter and IMs gives to the written word. I have never been good at writing it myself.
Well, Alice, just like me, origami has proved your downfall, because that is the reason that Nico has emerged victorious today.
Otherwise, we communicated perfectly. I'm sorry.
Look, you can take the Drake's head. You finish it off, and
Also, family has 3 syllables. I wasn't gonna say anything. I won honorably anyway, but so we don't get listener mail.
Where did family? Who
When
said
Alice said family name for Moon.
Oh shit! You're right.
It's fine. I won anyway. I just don't want listener mail.
I want to be very clear. Absolutely no listener would have written in because we just sound like stupid monkeys, and you just did that to make me feel like a piece of shit.
Hey, listener who would have written in, I'm kissing you on the mouth.
I'm kissing you gently on the cheek, and you're not sure if the lips touched.
Damn it! That's so more courtly.
That's my parasocial relationship with our fans. That of a 2 nights meeting in
Meanwhile,
armed
I'm
battle.
that comic drawing where they look like sock puppets and they're like blur, blur, blur.
Oh my god, I need to make hand puppets of these 2.
The new frontiers of art that OSG is going to be engaging in.
I have felt I have to do something stupid.
So we may or may not staple said interview onto this episode, or it may just kind of come out separately, but at the same time. But that is going to be in lieu of our letter today. So,
oh, you did an interview?
Indeed.
Huh?
With who?
With Thali Chan himself.
Thali Chan.
I'm so sorry about the things we've done here today.
I actually am pretty sure he's going to love that. So.
My man made a magnum opus to Yuri. I don't know if he'll be off put by me calling him Thali Chan. I do have a final thought.
Yeah.
It was 182 pages ago, but before book 1, there is a small excerpt, and it says it ends with chronicling their crimes and their cruel ending. This is my personal appeal to Thali. I love tragic Yuri. Please don't kill the gays. Please give me a different kind of tragedy.
To rewrite the Aeneid.
You've already killed one lesbian in this book. Please let my...
I have to tell you this right now. Unfortunately, this is the form of the poem, and also Thaliarchus he already wrote all of this, and he started with the ending. So I'll just say that.
I know it's a great tragedy, but I can still be upset when the gays die.
Alex,
You can.
join me on AO3, Cosmic
Nope.
Warlord Kin-Bright,
I can't
fanfic posting.
It has to be poetry, though. We have to.
We have to write poetry. Only fanfic for this can come in the form of poetry. I'll write a limerick.
Oh, we're all writing one poem for this, right? Since we
Oh,
can't post
God.
art on the website, everybody has to write a poem.
No. You shan't make me.
I have a final thought.
Thou scurvy knave. Yes, Nico.
I have
What
a
are you,
final
a pirate? A word I know instantly?
My final thought is I'm going to tell my grandkids that this was G-Witch.
Bandai Namco.
What Bandai would never.
Bandai Namco, where's
them
the sponsorship? Hire me as BNNA's social media coordinator.
Oh my god.
Thanks for listening. Pilots, remember you can reach out for advice from the team at our email, questions@osgpod.com, and non-pilots can send general questions or feedback to the same address. You can also catch up with us on social media, links in the description for updates and more. Make sure to check back in 2 weeks when we'll be discussing Gunhead, it's Counterweight.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing Counterweight,
Friends
y'all.
at the table. Counterweight.
The chime.
The bells are ringing.
The bells are ringing. Until then, goodbye. I love you.
I love your small hands, and I grasp them lovingly.
May fortune laughing her wages not pay to you.
This might tie into our first question here, but like, what is the general shape of your like interest in the mecha like genre? Like, I know you've been on. Is it correct that you've been on Giant Robot FM before?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, what was that? If you want to, like, if that's even a plug we want to do, and like, what are your like touchstones in general?
Yeah. Good way to begin.
Yeah.
I could approach that question several ways. Let's start with Giant Robot FM. I was on one of their very early episodes about Gundam the Origin, the OVA adaptation of Gundam the Origin, and that episode has maybe a longer discussion of like where I come from and how I wound up watching Giant Robot anime. I mean, I grew up in a house without a television. Not because of not because my parents had some kind of strong moral objection to televisions. We just didn't have very much money, and as you may know, in the UK, it's a de facto tax, but there's a thing called a TV license. You pay a yearly fee for access to television, which is why the BBC has money to do all the things it does. So I kind of grew up fairly isolated from popular culture, and then in my mid-teens, we got hold of a desktop PC which had a DVD player. So for the first time, it was possible to watch things. I think I stumbled across anime first in the form of the Cowboy Bebop film. This would have been the mid-2000s. And then I watched a few other things, but the anime that made me an anime fan, as it were, was Martian Successor Nadeshiko, or Kido Senkan Nadeshiko, I think it is, which, looking back on it now, that show, watching it now, I realised that it was a tremendous education in Giant Robot anime, because it is engaged with different kinds of robot show, and it's a reflection on the history of the genre, all of which went completely over my head back when I was a teenager. So for me, I suppose my relationship with anime has always been quite closely linked to anime with giant robots in them, and watching anime has been a hobby that's kind of been with me for a very long time. So in terms of like why am I engaged with mecha anime, it really is as simple as just a hobby and an interest that I imprinted on at an impressionable age. That was go ahead if you wanted to come in there, right?
No, that's just kind of the story, right? Is like, I think we all saw like the general kind of consensus is that like a bunch of millennials, at least in America, saw Gundam Wing on Toonami at like a very formative age, and it kind of like put them on a certain trajectory, right? So it's interesting that yours was Nadesico, which is it's fascinating because my co-host Nico also has that as like one of her like formative central things. We have not covered it yet, but I'm kind of excited knowing kind of what you said about how it engages with the genre like writ large. I'm excited to kind of learn about that whenever we get to it.
It's a real. I think you'll definitely appreciate some of the things that it does. Whether or not for you it turns out to be a show you love, I think you'll be able to see some of the things it's doing, which is very good fun. And it was also at roughly the same time in my life that I was sort of discovering poetry. I mean, I suppose anime and poetry are stereotypical things that you might get into in your teens. It's just less common to be into both. That was similarly sort of semi-accidental and serendipitous. I worked for a while, and then I went to university, and I did a degree in English literature, and I thought that would be all I did, and went off and worked for a while more, and then I went and did a master's in medieval English literature, and then I did a doctorate in medieval English literature.
Okay.
And I published a couple of for real like scholarly books with the university press, and it would be difficult. It would be too time consuming to try to explain how academia works in Britain, and it has many of the same problems as it does in the US, and some different ones, and some strengths and some weaknesses. Basically, I'm employed as something more long-term than an adjunct in American terms, but less fixed than a tenured professor, again, in American terms. So my day job is teaching students about actually more medieval than classical texts and so forth. But that's what happened to me career-wise. It's just that while that was happening every year, I was still watching mecha anime. So occasionally I'll say to my colleagues, I'm someone with hidden shallows, and I guess that's probably a big part of the background to why this poem happened, is that it's a confluence of two keynote interests I've had for a very long time. Mm-hmm.
You've been on this road. I was actually going to use the word confluence as well.
There you go. Yeah, great minds think alike. Yes. So I don't know when the very first sort of kernels of the poem were planted, but I did some months back. I searched my old tweets, and the earliest time I could find myself talking about the Aeneid, which is one of the big inspirations for the poem, and robot anime together, was in 2013. I wasn't contemplating writing anything in 2013, but I suppose obviously some of the ingredients were there 11 years ago. I can talk. I'm happy, if you want, to talk about how the idea sort of crystallized into me actually taking action on it as well. But that's a sort of deep history. So in terms of actually doing something, putting pen to paper, the idea of doing it came to my head. I was walking late in autumn in 2022 in a local nature reserve. Is sort of the earliest frost of the year, or maybe one of the earliest frosts of the year. And the ending of the story came to me, as did the thought that some of the inspirations, which we can talk about perhaps later, have plots that meld really well together. And then it seemed like it should probably be a sort of a Yuri story for various reasons. I have several friends who are always putting me on to new Yuri manga or Yuri anime, and one friend who's involved in translating Yuri manga. Another reason is that a big influence on how I've been thinking about this, and this is another show we might talk about later, is this show from the mid-2000s called Shamoon. But also the autumn of 2022 was, of course, when the first season of The Witch from Mercury was airing, and I was very struck by how people were responding to the character of Prospera in particular, if you've seen that show.
I haven't, but Alice has, and she will probably love this mention.
Right, yeah. So Prospera as a figure who wields power in a way that maybe the protagonists of The Witch from Mercury maybe don't. And then a few days after that realization, I was hanging out in my local shopping centre, because at the time a friend of mine was living near the shopping centre and I was going to go and see them later, and I figured I had like a dead 20 minutes, as it were, and I thought, I might as well get my notebook out and try writing something towards what would actually turn out to be the first book of the poem. So
you had the ending in mind from the get-go. Is that the ending that we have right now, or is that the ending like that nobody's even
as
thought
the
of
ending
yet?
No one's read yet, but it's been written, and it should come out within a few weeks. So I'm reading books of the poem every week, and I think we have 4 or 5 weeks left, which will take us to the very end of the poem, which I haven't yet released, but it should all be out there soon. So yes, the very end of the story did sort of arrive, and that is, if you think about some of the influences, there's a tradition of stories about Arthur, and many of them focus on his death. And the really famous one is Malory's Mort d'Arthur, and it's in the title. There's something else, a long poem called the alliterative Mort Arthur, which is a big influence on me, and is a poem I think is very, very good. There's another poem called the stanzaic Mort Arthur. So one of my influences is this tradition of writing, which is actually the whole tradition hangs on the idea of the end of the story.
No, that makes sense. I wonder if that's because it's come to me as someone who actually studied world literature and kind of purposefully avoided European literature for a long time in my academic career, that the idea of like spoiling an ending is an extremely Western sentiment. And I wonder if that has anything to do with that, because of the way that like those early kind of stories were structured around the ending in that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think you see it really arising with the kind of the coming of the European novel, I suspect, probably in the 18th century, and the creation of more narratives where being surprised by what happens is part of the point. And I think you're completely right that there are lots of traditions, storytelling traditions around the world. You will know more about them probably than me in many cases, where it's expected that often you will know broadly what's going to happen, and that is also true in Europe. Certainly in the Middle Ages and the Classical period, and it does create a different engagement with narrative, because everyone in the room has some broad sense of where we're going, but not necessarily how we get there. And you might have noticed at the beginning of Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright, it does have some lines that tell you broadly what's going to happen, not in detail, but the ending of the poem is fairly clearly signaled in the first book.
Sure, yeah. I mean, and that's another like kind of classical form too, and that kind of like just to kind of segue us into like this kind of outline proper. So you started this, or the conception came to you in 2022. So if you will have published the whole thing like basically by the end of the year, that is essentially like a 2 or 2.5 year project. Does that sound right?
Yeah, basically, and that's about at a rate of about an hour a day, because that's how I figured I wouldn't be able to finish it unless I made it a habit. So I just. I shouldn't use the adverb just, because it's not easy for anyone and it's harder for some. But I tried to build it into my day that I would set aside an hour in the evening and chip away at the whatever book I was working on.
No, that is kind of the conclusion you eventually have to come to if you actually want to get something done. I say this as someone who's been working on 2 separate manuscripts for probably about 7 years now.
Right, yeah.
So,
a very wise mentor once said to me that no, in a sense, no one ever writes more than one book. Once you've really put close the book. No, that's not the metaphor we should use. But once you finally shut one project and it's out and it's done, you know the whole process from soup to nuts, and it surprisingly makes the later ones much easier. And I think that's true. The experience of writing non-fiction books was not a help in most ways, but it was very helpful for the sense that having done it before, I could have confidence that actually I could do a kind of multi-year, very small chipping away at it sort of thing, and it would eventually work out.
Yeah, and I think the method of releasing books in small like swathes is kind of like microdosing that phenomenon, maybe.
Yeah, and it helped. I found it much easier to continue after I released the first book, and found that some people I didn't know, and then some of my friends really liked it, and that was sort of enough encouragement to keep me going. Yeah, so it had a sort of helpful benefit for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so like as I mentioned, I studied world literature and professional communication in my college career. So I never, when I looked at poetry, it was in a glancing fashion, and it was always just like the big standout classics. So I had been thinking about the itch page for Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright when I started reading. And one of the things that it kind of advertises about itself is competent poetry. And I was wondering what that specifically meant to you in terms of because there's a lot of, I think, and I don't know if this is part of the sensibility you had in mind here, but I think there is a lot of stuff out there where it's people regard poetry as something short, deeply, maybe emotional, and extremely easy to consume. You get poetry collections, and that's how most people approach poetry, is deeply personal memoir-related poetry collections. This is a very, very different thing. So I was wondering what that meant for you in terms of competency.
Yeah, thank you. That's one thing I should say first of all is it's not the competent is not meant as a sneer at any particular school of either of formal approach or of mode of writing. You're right that I think for most people that model of the short lyric expressing deeply held personal emotion, which we basically get, I think certainly in North American and European culture, we get that model from the sort of Romantic period, which is quite recent. That model is probably most people's models for poetry. I chose the word competent in part because I didn't want to oversell my own gifts. I'm not. There are better poets. I'm the poet who turned up for this particular task, I guess. To borrow one of the ways that one of my friends described my own work to me. There's an implicit question in literary history, I suppose, which was something like, gay men have had Achilles for thousands of years. Who is the lesbian Achilles in a giant robot? It may not be a question many people are very interested in, but some people, it turns out, are interested in it, and I'm the person who turned up. So, yeah, I don't want to pretend that I'm anything like as good a poet as some of my influences. So that's one reason why I picked competent. I suppose another is that I have written the poem in specific defined forms with rules which I've tried to follow. I'm sure I haven't followed them perfectly, in absolutely every single line. And I don't think that formal rule-bound poetry is inherently better than free verse. There's amazing free verse poetry. My favourite 20th century poet is Tom Gunn. Gunn, who has a remarkable career, wrote some amazing poems, and he wrote both in tight form and in free verse, and in syllabic lines. Much better poet than me. But I'm better at writing rule-bound poetry than I am at writing free verse, and the competent is also sort of flagging that most of the time the poetry is going to cash the checks that the form is writing, even when that's complex and hard
And I
to do.
think for as little as this is worth, as someone who's very not knowledgeable at these things, at least when you look at the words on the page, it does seem like that's what's happening. So
good. That's very encouraging.
But yeah, on the topic of that not really being my expertise, I was hoping that you could kind of like do some of the. I didn't realize you were a teacher before I put this question on here. So not to make you like talk shop, but like if you could educate us a little bit on like what those rules were and like why you decided to use them, and things like that.
Yeah. So an easy majority of the lines in the poem are written in blank verse, which is a form that most people will have encountered before. Much of the material in Shakespeare's plays, not all of it, but much of it is in blank verse. So if you've had any kind of secondary level literary education in an English-speaking country, or you've studied English in a number of other countries, you may well have encountered like a bit of this before. And the way that works is that each line has 5 beats. It has a rising rhythm, so you tend to have an offbeat and then a beat. And there is no regular rhyme or regular alliteration. It's a good form for long-form writing because the lack of regular rhyme and regular alliteration is fairly undemanding. It's very flexible, and it has a lot of history, which means it's by using it, you assert a kind of continuity stretching back to things like Paradise Lost, which is written in blank verse, or Shakespeare, or the first place that blank verse is used in the 16th century is the partial translation of the Aeneid, which is one of my big influences, by Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, who is, in one sense, the inventor of blank verse. There's a complicated story there, which I won't get into. And my point in using it is not to assert that I deserve the respect that is commonly accorded to Milton as a highly canonical figure. In a way, I am a bit more sceptical about, and I think Paradise Lost is a great poem. I'm not very into the business of saying, we should all be writing like Paradise Lost, or the only kind of poetry that's good is poetry like Paradise Lost. And I think actually the choice of blank verse is more, actually you can write about really pulpy things that everyone thinks is really lowbrow in blank verse. Here is my allusion to Shin Get a Robo versus Neo Get a Robo, a really great, really funny OVA that is also in the same form that Shakespeare wrote in. So that's the main form, and then I have several different kinds of alliterative poetry, which are drawn from Old English models, so sort of poetry from the sort of 7th to the 11th century in English, but also a different kind of alliterative poetry drawn from later Middle English models, so sort of 14th to 15th century. And then, because I'm dangerously into anime, there's a kind of alliterative poetry which is sort of like, what if you tried to do haiku, but using the tools of alliterative poetry, which is used for death songs that characters deliver when they're defeated. If you add that to blank verse, you sort of have a compendium of different forms from the history of English poetry at different times. And they also have, if you write something in alliterative verse today, people say that it sounds very metal. That's the adjective that people keep using. So it has certain useful associations.
I was actually, I clued into a couple moments of the stream earlier today, just while I was doing my own thing. And I did, multiple people used that word in that stream.
Right,
so.
Yeah. And I promise I haven't trained anyone to do that. I mean, that's just the... and then the books 9 and 10 mostly take place in the underworld, in the land of the dead. And this is a traditional thing in epic. Lots of epic poems have a sequence where the protagonist goes into the land of the dead. And a lot of that sequence is written in a form called rhyme royal, which is also uses a 5-beat rising line, like blank verse, but in 7-line stanzas, which actually do have compulsory rhyme, and they rhyme A, B, A, B, B, C, C. And that stanza form, apart from everything else, it represents an altered state of mind, so that those stanzas begin when the characters enter the space station that contains the land of the dead, and those stanzas end when they leave. But that stanza form also has associations with romance, both in terms of the modern sense of the word romance, like amatory, erotic and romantic discourse, but also romance as in like adventure stories and journeys. And one of the most prominent poems written in it is a poem called Troilus and Cressade by Geoffrey Chaucer, late 14th century poem, which is another of my influences. It is set inside Troy before the fall of Troy, and it's a deeply unsettling and troubling, but also very, very beautiful, disastrous love story. So there's a set of associations I'm kind of calling on by using these different forms. And if someone reads the whole poem, they've actually then been trained in many of the key forms you might encounter in reading the sources.
That's so interesting. I think that's one of the best strengths about poetry as a concept, is the ways that you can, because like one of the things I was going to say earlier too is like the fact that you're able to mesh these different styles makes it hit really hard. Like the way that the format changes in books 9 and 10, and then like even just in small moments where you do decide to rhyme like otherwise throughout.
Yes.
Those hit way harder because of that.
Yes, definitely. And I think it's analogous to the way that if you're making a robot anime, there are shots you can choose to borrow, and there are techniques you can choose to borrow, and shots are going to be more locatable. I mean, if you borrow the famous unmoving Evangelion lift elevator, North American English shot, everyone will know that you're alluding to that. If you encourage your animators to draw like an Etano circus, like a big cluster cloud of missiles flying around all over the place, that's more like a technique. But similarly, there are these things you can do that point to tradition and also create these sort of heightened moments. There's a kind of animation and poetry are very different, but that is one way in which there are, analogies, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is going to be it probably already has and will continue to be a revelation for many people that actually, like, poetry can be incredibly anime, which I don't know if this was something you intended to do with this project, but I had never... it's almost like one was on one side of my brain and the other was on the other side, and I never thought that they could like shake hands in a way that I thought was going to be sick.
Right, yeah. Well, that's it's a great compliment to hear you say that. Thank you. I think because of the particular cultural trappings that have gathered around poetry over the last 500 or so years, which to me as a medievalist I regard as modernity and recent, it's harder to see the ways that a lot of poems which are now canonical and therefore aren't allowed to be fun are actually great fun, there are passages in the Iliad or in Beowulf that are clearly meant to be very exciting, and those are analogous to Imagawa thinking about how to make a bit of an episode of Giant Robo the Day the Earth Stood Still really gripping and exciting. I mean, they're only analogous, it's not the same thing, but and I think it's a shame when we forget that these were meant to be entertaining. And I don't mean that in the... Occasionally you'll hear people sort of say, Shakespeare was just like, reality TV or TikTok or whatever modern cultural thing they want to associate Shakespeare with in order to sell him to people. I don't mean it in that sense. I mean it on the face of it. These were entertaining things that people wanted to have fun experiencing, and I'm trying to capture that with what I'm doing, and I'm sure I'm sure only imperfectly, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of wraps into one of the things I said here too, which is just that, like, poetry does have this sort of elevated, prestigious air to it. And like, yeah, it can be, some of these things can be a little bit difficult to read. I actually had a lot of problems in my like early college career adjusting to even just the way that academia talks about these things, but nonetheless, like the barely sort of adapted Old English stuff itself. But yeah, I don't know if you have like, we don't always set out to make things just so that they will proliferate, but I did wonder if you had thoughts on how that was going to affect the approachability of this.
Yeah, and it's a really good thing to think about. I think I would want to separate out prestige and difficulty. I don't think they always go together. To tackle prestige first, I think, building on what I was just saying, it's worth remembering that many of the old poems, which are now prestigious, clearly they're well made, but they weren't necessarily a big deal in their own time. So as an example, everyone has at least heard of the poem we now call Beowulf. It doesn't have a title really, but that's the title we've given it. I can only think of 3 people who probably provably read it within the Old English period, which is the 2 scribes who copied the one surviving copy, and then the poet of another Old English poem called Andreas, who seems to borrow some motifs from Beowulf. There might be other people you could point to, but there are other works in Old English which circulated much more widely, and they survive in many more copies. And then writing in Latin had a much larger audience, because if you wrote something in Latin in the 10th century, you could send it anywhere in Western Europe, and anyone who was educated would be able to read it. So my point is not that Beowulf is bad, but it looks like it might have been something of a niche taste in its own time. And it owes significant amounts of its popularity to modern things like 19th century scholarship or Seamus Heaney's late 20th century translation, which is very good. Or Maria Devana Headley's recent translation of it, which begins with the word bro, and is actually also quite a good translation. This is a bit like the original Gundam getting cancelled during its original broadcast and only later growing into the big thing everyone knows, if you stretch the timescale by about 12 centuries rather than a few years. Obviously, Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright inhabits a tradition that's associated with prestige. I'm confident most of my colleagues would say that it was unacceptably pulpy if they ever stumbled across it, God help me. And it's shot through with allusions to things that are regarded as low culture, even by other anime fans. So one of the books that I streamed tonight contains a short lyric poem, which is actually a loose translation of the ending song of Space Warrior Baldios, quite good super robot show from the early 1980s. Most anime fans today would think, if they came across Baldios at all, which they don't, that it was beneath their notice, because first it's for children and second it's old. So people who don't watch anime are obviously not going to have any time for Space Warrior Baldios at all. So I think part of the fun in Space Warrior, in Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright, is that it is constantly juxtaposing things we think of as sort of prestigious or even potentially pretentious, and things we think of as lowbrow. Completely, yeah. Difficulty is a different thing, and it is just inherent in the nature of verse that it's harder to read than prose. Anyone who sets out to write a long-form narrative poem, well, they probably have to accept that it's going to limit their readership. And either you make your peace with that, or you change project and you write a novel, which is perfectly legitimate, aesthetic choice to make.
When I say difficult too, like there's a certain glass half full angle to that, which is to say, like, the fact that so much of poetry is open to interpretation actually, like, in some ways can make it easier to read. It's just that, I think we are trained to extract very specific meanings out of what we're reading. And
Yes.
so like and poetry is a little bit resistant to that.
Sitting either at the large scale of what the hell is going on with the gods in Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright, or at the small scale of like, here's a sentence, the verb is 3 lines away, good luck. Both of those are experiences where you have to be more willing to sit with indeterminacy. I think there are, again, analogies to be drawn to mecha anime. I mean, in 2024, not every anime fan wants to go off and watch all of, like, heavy metal Elgime or Tosho Daimos or even, I mean, there are plenty of anime fans who, if you talk to them, will say they specifically avoid all mecha anime, so even popular, well-regarded things that lots of people like, they just won't, they won't watch them because there's giant robots in them, and that can be a little frustrating, but, it's a hobby at the end of the day. Flip side of that is that if you do meet someone who actively watches robot anime, you can often have a great conversation with them. Because people in the 2020s are not watching, like, Gunbuster by accident. So if you meet someone who's watched Gunbuster, like, there's probably stuff you can say. I think you get a similar effect. Let's call it the sickos effect. You get the sickos effect with epic poetry as well as with mecha anime. I think in the people you do run into when you're talking about it or putting it out into the world are maybe more engaged than people who are watching this season's latest crop of shows adapting light novels about being sent to another world, which is a respectable thing to do and more power to them, but it's not what everyone's here for.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things that being eternally online has kind of brought out in us is our ability to start, like, assessing value and ascribing value to things like that, when it's just like, yeah, I mean, we're all just kind of here to watch or read stuff.
Right. Yeah. It's it's not. I have like, I have more important judgments in my life to cast on people than and I think in terms of you talked about sort of circulate proliferation, I think was the word you used, and I suppose I've obviously avoided the traditional manner of publishing poetry, which would be to publish some excerpts and small poems in poetry magazines, and then see if you could get a press like Blood Axe, or if you're really lucky, like Faber and Faber, to publish your work. And I've known a few, like, proper working poets in my time who do publish, like, print books with prestigious presses and so forth. They're great people and they do valuable things. I do think a lot of their world has travelled quite a long way away from trying to entertain people, and I'm not sure Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright is necessarily suited to that world. And it's distributed for free on itch.io. It's read aloud as an event on Twitch. I don't have a large audience, but knowing, as I do, some figures from the world of professional poetry as well, I do know that I actually have a bigger audience than some poetry printed by real presses gets. So, and I guess those choices of venue also help to fend off pretension. When the poem's finished, I'm going to release a commentary version, which will have some marginal notes explaining where I took ideas from and discussing some of my choices. And that file is literally called, like, Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright New Game Plus. And I think why not admit that it's okay for some of this stuff to be fun and pitch it along those lines. And that's not to denigrate other kinds of uses of verse, but this is this kind of verse, not that kind of verse.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, to kind of get into the, I kept this broad mostly just because I do think the episode that I'm going to staple this to, obviously we're going to get very into the details of the poem, but B, I also just think that if people, and this does happen, I've confirmed this, listen to the episode just for the interview, I want to make sure that people know that you should probably just go and experience this because it's not terribly long at the moment. It sounds like it's probably going to grow. It's about 50% published. Does that sound right?
Roughly. I mean, in terms of word count, it's going to top out at under 100,000 words, which is the length of a mid-length novel. It's certainly not the length of a long novel.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at with that. But I did want to ask about like just broadly the kind of naming conventions here. Like things like how the Taro name themselves, which is a very consistent rule that we see throughout the whole thing. And then like, you know, other factions obviously having completely different naming conventions. And the shape of that to me in the mecha space is something that is extremely important. Like that's such a thing, at least in my experience. So I was wondering if you had like any specific things that you thought about, or like any specific things that you were pulling from in those rules.
Well, that's a lovely thing to talk about. Yes, and it does partly come from watching robot anime. So I know obviously everyone talks about Tomino names or Gundam names, and that's certainly something that's kind of in the background of what I was doing. And there's also a sort of, it actually comes, of course, from military practice, but there's a ritualized quality to things like the things that pilots will say when they launch, and also to, like, in super robot shows, like shouting the names of your attacks, and the catchphrase that you might say when the robot combines and so forth. I was also, this is one of the many places where things from the watching too many mecha anime side of my life and things from the, teaching and reading side of my life kind of came together, because the way that Taru names work is an extension and an adaptation of the way that people in early medieval England gave each other names. So before the Norman Conquest, the English often constructed names by choosing two different name words and then jamming them together. And often siblings had the same first element. So King Alfred, who people might have heard of, had three older brothers, and they were called Athelbald, Athelbert, and Athelred. So they all had this Athel element at the beginning, which is actually the ancestor of the word Hathel, which crops up in the poem occasionally, means noble. And it was a short step from that to saying, what if the first element is like a family name that everyone in the clan has, and then the second element is the personal name. And obviously I thought of that because family name first is the convention in Japanese, as in a bunch of East Asian languages, and I watch too many anime. So there was a kind of intersection there that sort of seemed to make sense, and it began to, as you say, it began to feel like conveyed the idea of a consistent cultural background without requiring me to be like, here's my world-building Bible that has 100 pages of, detailed notes.
It also helps in terms of like one of the things that that epic poems kind of do that Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright also does is refer to people by name that have not been referred to by name before. And it's easy to tell, oh, okay, we're in the middle of a fight. This person just killed this person. Even though we've never heard these names before, I know that a pirate just killed a Taru person or something like that.
Right. Yes. Exactly. Yes. And there are a few characters in the poem where if you're watching closely, you can work out that they must be related to each other in some way. So that's that side, and then I suppose also I was aware that it's famously incredibly annoying and a huge part of the well, not huge, but a small but incredibly annoying challenge in writing stories that are in some sense made up is coming up with names for the characters, and I'm very lazy, so my approach to these is always like, oh, what if I generated a system that just gave me names? I mean, wouldn't that be easier? So, and some of the names are thematically important. So the the way the poem resolves is related to the fact that Kin-Bright is very engaged with the interests of her kin and questions around who gets to count as her kin. And the Quet in Quethart's name is a now obsolete word meaning strong or healthy. So, something like, strong-hearted. She's a bit more physically vigorous and boisterous than Kin-Bright, which is a personal quality, and her behaviour is a bit more egalitarian than is normal among the Taru, which is partly to do with coming from a different cultural context, because for people who haven't read the poem, she's a Skelander, which means she comes from a different cultural background. And in some ways, that name also relates to how she's going to react to some important choices towards the end of the plot. So some of the names also have specific meanings in the same way that there's a character in Shakespeare called Malvolio, or there's a character in Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright called Scathmod, which means harmful mood, harmful heart, harmful mind, and that is. It's not a terribly loose translation of the name for the same character in Virgil, who, when you look it up, is he's called Sinon. But if you look up the probable etymology of his name, it just means sinner or terrible person,
right,
or whatever.
Right.
So, and of course, again, Japanese writing, both in novels and films and anime, is more given to this. People will have names that mean things thematically for their characters.
Well, yes, absolutely, and that also partially comes too from just the fact that of the way that Japanese alphabets work. You can have a name that doesn't necessarily translate to anything, but when you write it down, it is the characters for certain words.
Absolutely, and it's also because like the early medieval English did, in Japanese, as in many languages around the world, people still have names that mean things in their own language. And if you're not, I'm sure not everyone listening to this will be, but people who come from a first language English culture more often have names that are Greek or Hebrew, and so change that happen to English. So it's I think I've heard this often pointed out with reference to Kojima, actually, because, of course, there are characters in Metal Gear Solid and Death Stranding and so forth who are called things in English that are very meaningful names, but that can throw people because we're not used to the idea that you're his was it Heartman or something in Death Stranding?
Die Hard Man. And the character's name is Sam Porter Bridges. Which is
exactly.
The activity that he's doing. So it's totally that.
Right, and that to Shakespeare that would be normal. He has a character called Malvolio who it wishes everyone ill, which is what his name means. But it can be strange for us to get our heads around that. This system of names for the Taru allows me to do that in a way that doesn't feel like I'm just giving people labels, I guess.
Yeah, totally. A lot of these next ones I'm reading, we've basically already talked about.
I can talk about the names of the armors as well, if that.
Oh yes, please. Yes, my only kind of note on this, and it's mostly just because we recently did an episode relative to this, but was just that a lot of these have like Pacific Rim Jaeger energy in terms of the Taru armor names. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think Pacific Rim and. Aptly, because you've recently been covering it, you had a wonderful interview with AVB recently about Heaven Will Be Mine, and the robots in that also have names that, well, I mean, some of them are maybe meaningful in different ways to the ways that Taru armors have meaningful names, but again, they're going for a point and they have a kind of rhythm to them. So again, I wanted the armors to have names, and I didn't want to spend any effort on that because I'm very lazy. So I decided that the armor names should alliterate, and they should usually, for the Taru, they have pastoral motifs. So things to do with farming or nature. And what it means is that whenever you hear an armor name, the when the Taru want to speak really formally, they switch into alliterative verse. The armor names also alliterate. So whenever you hear an armor name, it carries this kind of learned formality that you pick up from the alliterative verse sections, which I think is hopefully a nice effect. And also, I've really tried to make the names quite varied otherwise, provided they alliterate and have some kind of pastoral or nature motif. So you do have names like Hellebore Hulk, which is just like a flower, and then a Hulk is something big and powerful. That's the kind of name you might expect an armor to have. 1,000 Thornbills is a bit weirder as a name. It's got thorn in it, so it sounds a bit threatening. But but
also a thornbill is a very small round bird. So like it's
right, yeah. Then the Earl of Hawks pilots an armor with a kind of avian, like bird kind of motif, because he's the Earl of Hawks. So it's called these cloud-born claws. So like beginning with like a determiner, is something that marks it out from the other armors. So there's a sense of sort of variety and customization, so hopefully without me saying these are all ancient machines that are all very different to each other and are very carefully looked after, that's kind of conveyed just by the fact that they have these very strange names.
And I think the fact that Kin-Bright's is just called the Key is also part of like this is a different thing than the rest of them.
Yes, definitely, absolutely, yeah. And of course, it alliterates with Kin-Bright, which is really helpful if you need to put them in the same same line. but yeah, no, totally. It's one syllable. It doesn't alliterate with anything else within the name. And you're right. It's an armor from elsewhere. It's very strange. It's doing very strange things. Totally.
Yeah. So kind of to speak more on the mechs themselves. Because of the way that if it were a novel, we would have like action scenes where it's like, this person does this and their mech does this and it fires this weapon. But poetry obviously doesn't quite do that. And so one of the things we have to distinguish the armors from each other than their names are just the things that they can do and their loadouts. So like when you're sitting there, like the sense I get is just from other questions, just based on like how much, where you wanted to kind of put your effort. The sense I get was just that like you wanted to just make them different. But I don't know if you had any specific thoughts on like, the standout one to me right now that's just coming to mind is Kin-Bright's original armor that had like the drill arms.
Yeah. Thank you. And that's a lovely question. As you say, in some ways it is simply a desire to keep things different.
Yes.
I did fairly early on in the writing process, I just sat down and wrote out a big page of like an A4, which is not a paper size. It'll make sense in North America for any North American listeners. Sorry, a large, like letter paper sort of size page.
I work in printing, so unfortunately, I do know exactly what you mean. But anyway,
right, okay. Yeah. I found the one person who would know.
Yes.
And I just sat down and I wrote two columns. So probably must have been like 40 different weapons, the armors, different. And I've tried to make them as outlandish and different as. And drills was obviously one of the ones because drills are such a tradition in robot anime. And then I tried to whenever I was casting around for how an armor would behave, if there wasn't something in the name that would strongly suggest how it might function, I would turn to that page and go, I haven't talked about like whips made of light yet, or this armor could have a mace. So that's serendipitous. There are choices which are to do with people's characters. I'm not sure character is exactly a word I'd use of the figures in this poem, but yeah, they tell us about the people. So what's it called? Caprice of Prickthorn, the light armor that Kin-Bright pilots in books 2 and 3. Well, first of all, she tells us that when her father piloted it was called Prince's Caprice. And by the maintenance staff, it's suggested that the name may in fact have changed because the maintenance staff changed what they were calling it. And she doesn't comment on this and is probably not aware of it, but the implication might be that Kin-Bright is quite prickly and hard to deal with as someone who's, you know, if you're less important than her, she's probably quite brusque and she's quite stiff with everyone who is as important with her, probably because I'm English, so there's that, and then it's a dueling machine, so it's light and agile, and I suppose I wanted to convey that sense that this city under siege has pressed into service various armors that maybe weren't, you know, war-fighting machines originally. There's very little pat labour in Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright, but that sort of sense in pat labour, right, of sort of technology being put to different purposes, and you have the visible distinction between military labours and police labours and construction labours and so forth. The drills, in some ways, the drills suited the particular scene in which they're first introduced, because he's fighting in she thinks they're all doomed, and she's fighting in a very reckless way, and drills feel like a very reckless weapon, I suppose. And there's a character in one of the recent books called Tightbark who is a sort of naive and quite high-spirited prince. There's a little bit of Utena from Revolutionary Girl Utena in her. And she pilots a very, very agile, like, dancing armour. So that tells us about her, but it's also kind of like an echo of Kin-Bright's younger self, I hope. But in other cases, it was just like... 1,000 Thornbills sounds like something that would kill you with like a death of 1,000 cuts. So Kinhard's armor has like big. It's like heavy arms, or I think it's the Leopard Gundam in Gundam X. But you know, it has like multi-rotary, multi-barreled guns. While these Cloudborn Claws has pinions, like a raptor has claws, appropriately enough. And Nightingale of Needles. Initially, I just liked the phrase. As a bird in it, so it's got a kind of pastoral motif. And then I thought the needles could be like launch tubes or pipes. And then I decided that when it was fighting in atmosphere, maybe it has this like apparatus that allows it to use sound as a weapon, which I'm sure is probably scientifically implausible, but it's a very weird poem already anyway. So there is some examples.
we are in full science fiction, and that is one of the things too that I think is interesting. That is a standout one to me as well, just because of the way that I don't think that is a if not underexplored, just not very explored medium in the mecha space, which is just to say like super weird weapons that aren't just like lasers or missiles or like your heat axes and swords.
I think super robot anime, because holding the attention of 5-year-olds is harder, has this kind of richer tradition of, and a number of the there's an armor in I think book 6 which has like chainsaw teeth on its arms, and it tries to like grapple and wrestle with its opponent while like soaring into them, and I'm pretty sure that's inspired by something I once saw in an old Super Robot show, or a clip of it called Steel Jeeg, for example. So I think some of the wackier ideas definitely come from the Super Robot tradition, while other aspects of the poem are definitely drawing on things like UC Gundam and maybe more real robot things. Yeah.
Leaving the mechs to be cool over there. One of the important questions that I had that's maybe more interpretive than anything was just that I noticed, like, and this is also a poetry thing, but the word fortune, for example, is capitalized, and in some, again, this is interpretive, but in some places it appears to just like refer to a being named Fortune, like a god, and in other ways it is more of a phenomenon. But it's always capitalized. And I was wondering if there is like a motif that you were using for that, or if there is some intentionality there, or if that's just kind of the part of speech. Because the word god, for example, when referring to something that you may or may not consider like an actual war god, is lowercase.
So fortune is both a force and a personification, and maybe an actual goddess. Yes. One of the most influential works of late antiquity that then has this kind of huge influence in Western Europe for or probably at least into the 17th century, is the Constellation of Philosophy by someone called Boethius. It's quite short. And the most influential image in the Constellation of Philosophy is this image of Fortune, the personification of chance, who everyone lives on Fortune's wheel. So she's whirling a wheel around and you don't have any control over whether you're going to be up the top of the wheel, which is great, you know. And it crops up all over the place in medieval art. It's the only text that was translated into English by either King Alfred or someone close to him, and Geoffrey Chaucer and Queen Elizabeth I. And it's generally something that kind of runs through medieval culture. Basically, it's the equivalent of the tweet or the saying, like, me sowing, haha, fuck yeah, yes, me reaping, well, this fucking sucks, what the fuck. But you know, that's the lesson, right? Is you know, yes. you never know when fortune will come for you, and you've got to kind of take your lumps when things go bad, and not get too full of yourself when things go well. And Fortune was a goddess in the Roman period. So that's the literary tradition that I'm drawing on, and it's also, there's a famous and really good piece of literary criticism about the Iliad by Simone Weil, who's the kind of mid-20th century philosopher, called The Iliad, or the Poem of Force. I think classicists today would say that it's not entirely convincing as an account of what's going on in the Iliad, because Weil was not a professional classicist and didn't necessarily have the full understanding of all the historical context. But as a reading of the Iliad, and a case for the interest of the Iliad, it's amazing. It's probably one of the best pieces of writing about the Iliad there's ever been. And one of the things she talks about is the way that force is one of the great themes of the Iliad. Force reduces other people to... Remember, she's writing in the middle of the 20th century, so she's seeing the kind of horrors of the Second World War. Force has this capacity to turn other humans into objects, basically, she says. And she says those who have force on loan from fate forget that they only have it on loan. And in time, because of this, they are destroyed. Achilles can reduce Hector to an object, and in the moment he's not going to be thinking about the fact that one day he will die, although he does acknowledge that elsewhere. But we know, and the poem tells us, that although it doesn't happen inside the Iliad, one day Achilles will just be as Hector is. It's a very, very good essay, and I strongly recommend it to anyone who's interested. And that intersects with the Fortune, and Weil is not talking about Fortune, but it is sort of the same idea of kind of trying to remember that a lot of life is outside your control. Fortune will turn up later in the poem in a book that hasn't been released, in a passage that I stole from the Illiterative Mort Arthur. So yeah, there's I should also just address the God thing. Actually, in Old and Middle English, scribes copying the texts don't normally put what we would call a capital letter at the beginning of God anyway, even when they're writing about the Christian God. It's a more recent convention. And capitalization in general is much less standardized before print. But yeah, in the keeping it to a lowercase g for the God that is clearly a bit like the Ideon from Space Runaway Ideon, it's an effort to both capture a world like Greece and classical Greece and Rome, where there were many gods, but it's also capturing the way that to Kin-Bright it's self-evidently a god, and you'd be hard pressed to persuade her that it isn't, because it has clearly saved the Taru a number of times. But to Quethart, she's not at all. She's willing to entertain the idea that it might be a god, but she's not at all convinced. And she's a bit skeptical about it. I mean, she thinks it's very powerful, but she's skeptical about it and distressed by the effect that it has on Kin-Bright, and that also, I think, it's easier to do that with a lowercase g.
That's interesting. Yeah, it hadn't actually occurred to me that it might be like a literary device in terms of like the value assessments different characters are also going to give it, especially as plots happen to and around it.
Yeah, and interestingly, the people in the garden, which is the area the story of the poem has just gotten to at the time of recording, they do think it's a god, but they think that's a really bad thing.
Okay.
So they have a third position, which is it is definitely holy, and that is really bad. Why did you bring that here? Now we have a problem. And this is one of the influence. So narratively, the poem is very much drawing on the Aeneid and on Ideon. One of the other big influences is this mid-2000s show called Shimoon, and the influence is less obvious because the plot is not drawing on Shimoon. But one of the things Shimoon does really well is it's about a group of people who are, well, their society regards them as priestesses, regards them as holy. Some of them entirely believe that, and some of them are very, very skeptical. And by the end of the show, we've learned that things don't work in exactly the way that the national religion says doctrinally they do. But we've also learned that there is something going on there, and in a sense, both the skeptics and the true believers have kind of been given more to think about. It's not something that many anime engage with. Shimoon has strengths and weaknesses, but that is a real strength, I think, in the show, and that is one of the inspirations behind this idea of the quiet background worry through the poem that different characters think different things about this object.
Yeah. Well, and also Shimoon also has Yuri vibes, if I recall correctly.
Oh, totally. Oh, no, it's absolutely. I mean, it's Shimoon is a lot of different things, but it's absolutely a Yuri anime. It's a Bishoujo anime. I mean, the Megami magazine ran like articles on it. So Shimoon has 2 manga adaptations, and one of them ran in I think it's Comic Yuri Hime, but like a magazine that is for Yuri manga, I believe, and. The other one ran in Megami magazine, which is like a pin-up magazine, which doesn't mean that it's only read by like straight men. It definitely isn't only read by straight men, but like it's a different context in which to. Let me just check my facts on that. But yeah, I think I'm right in saying that. And so Shimoon is many things, but it is definitely a Yuri title, and that is one of the influences. On Comic Yuri Hime, there we go. So the straightforward adaptation of the story into manga form was run in Comic Yuri Hime, and there was like a comedy manga version which was run in Megami magazine, and then there was a light novel adaptation which is more straightforward, and that was under the same imprint as Megami magazine. Sorry, bit of a digression. Let's not get into the enumerative bibliography.
Right. Well, maybe that'll be in the New Game Plus manuscript.
Yeah, totally.
We're getting pretty close to wrapping up. I think one thing that is kind of important for me to ask, and this is something I typically tend to ask interviewees if it is specifically their work that we're talking about, which is to say, like, what do you have any specific hopes for like the future of Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright? I mean, I know we're not done yet, but just in terms of like, do you see yourself coming back to this in somewhere or another? Things like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, of course, Fortune can do anything she wants to, but
right.
I think I have been kicking around a few ideas that would. I don't expect to write anything else involving the same characters or the same time, but I have been kicking around a few ideas which would take place in some of the same places at other times. And I've also been having a play with the interactive fiction engine Twine.
Okay.
And so I don't know whether that will go anywhere, and I'm not going to commit myself to anything. But
don't promise anything. But that did make my eyes widen.
So yeah, I would certainly like to keep writing verse, and there aren't very many poems written in Twine. Yeah, maybe. But I think getting the poem out is the main thing. And one thing I think fairly confidently say is I don't expect to write any long form narrative that treats with these particular characters once Kin-Bright's done. But otherwise, yeah, the door is very open, I think.
And then the last thing I have, which is just something we ask everybody, which is just that in the oeuvre of humanity, what is your favorite mech? And it can be something from Kin-Bright, but out of anything.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm a terrible prevaricator and ditherer, and I'm sort of prone to groups of favourites rather than individuals. I'm very, very fond of the Turn A Gundam from Turn A Gundam, which is possibly my favourite anime. I really like
for people listening who aren't familiar with Gundam, that is the mustache one. You have seen it before.
Yes, yeah. I think, like a lot of people, I know it's been mentioned on the podcast before. I really like the Kenfer. The Giant Robo from Giant Robo, The Day the Earth Stood Still, is both visually an incredible robot, but also narratively is fantastic. There's a mass production tactical surface fighter in Mavlav Alternative called the Shiranui, which is sort of it's not the most advanced, but it's like a mid-generation in its own setting, very agile, very lithe, really interesting lines. Because of the nature of the story, there's there are units of it which have a kind of UN forces livery, which I think is quite attractive. So yeah, those would be some of the ones I would immediately look to. I'm kind of turning around to look at the cabinet behind me, which has a recent one that I don't know whether I'll still be talking about it in 10 years in the way that I am with some of those others, but I actually really liked the design of the Caliban from the end of The Witch from Mercury, which is conceptually quite fun, but also just great to look at, and I have the high-grade kit of it behind me.
Yeah. Yep.
There are some of mine.
Yeah, totally. I did want to shout out Giant Robo, because I do think this is another thing where it's like, if you're listening, you've probably seen this before, but we haven't talked about it at all, and neither of the people that we've talked about on our show have talked about it. But this is probably one of the most legendary out of all of them. So I'm glad you brought it, because it paints one of the most striking figures, I think, in the whole genre.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and the way that Giant Robo is presented in the 1990s OVA is kind of a masterclass in like how to engage your audience with the title robot. So yeah, it definitely deserves a shout out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have for you. Did you have anything you want to plug, or any other like things that you wanted to talk about while you have the OSG audience captured?
The floor, yeah. I think. But beyond, if anyone's curious about Cosmic Warlord Kin-Bright, please give it a try. If you hate it, that's fine. But it would be a shame not to try it. It's free. It's on itch.io. You can get it in PDF or EPUB format. And if you either prefer to listen or need to listen to books, I'm streaming it I'm reading it aloud on Twitch week by week. So if you go to my Twitch page, you can find recordings of those. In the long term, I'd quite like to record like a proper audiobook version, but for accessibility, if nothing else, having those on-demand videos is really good.
It's Twitch. It's just Twitch TV. How did Twitch handles work?
I'll find it up in a second. I mean, the one thing I should say is, if you want for some godforsaken reason to find me online, I'm on Blue Sky, and I'm still on Twitter, and I'm on Twitch, and the username on all of those is Thaliarchus, which is THALIARCHUS. US. And I can probably find the exact Twitch URL. It's
I think it's twitch.tv/Thaliarchus. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So those are places you can find me, but Itch is where you can find the text. And if you read the poem and enjoy it, please rate it on Itch, and also let me know. I'm always delighted to hear from people who've gotten something out of it, which is great. And thank you for being interested and taking the time to talk to me. It's an honor to be on OSG, and I'll look forward to
I think it's been pretty obvious so far. I'm pretty high on this. I'm pretty hot on this as a piece of fiction. We by policy as to not burn pod are pretty secretive about it up until the record, so I can't speak about my co-hosts, but I am going to spend about 3 hours tomorrow talking this up. So,
well,
yeah,
that's very flattering and good to hear. And I won't at all be offended if your co-hosts are colder on it. I mean, this is not a medium or a text for everyone, and that's fine. So, yeah. Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.